Good evening and welcome to the July 20th study session for the Lakewood City Council. I'll go ahead and call us to order at 7:08 p.m. To connect to the council meeting, please use one of the following links: lakewoodspeaks.org or lakewood.gov/council videos. For online public comments, you may post comments of any length at lakewoodspeaks.org, an online forum for public comments. We're leaving online public comments open during the study session and through 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for any comments related to tonight's presentations. With that, I'll hand it over to the clerk for roll call.
Councilors Black.
Here.
Cruz I.
Here.
Cruz K.
Here.
Furman.
Here.
LeBure.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Nystrom.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Sinks.
Here.
Mayor Strom is absent. Mayor Pro Tem Sharzai.
Here.
Great. You have a quorum.
All right, wonderful. So we have two discussion presentations this evening, the first of which is on the topic of homelessness. And with that, we'll welcome Chris Connor, Housing Manager and Division Chief Alish, for a presentation this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Sharzai. I think Division Chief Alish needs to be called over. Oh, there you are. See you there. Thank you. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Please let me know if you see the notes page or if you're seeing just the full slide.
It's the slides.
Perfect. Thank you. In preparation for the presentation here, the one slide that I missed was the preview slide. So I'm going to talk over the cover slide here a little bit about what we'll be discussing tonight. We're going to give an update on our point in time trends and some trends in associated with encampments that we see through the city data. We're going to talk a lot and spend a lot of time on a strategic model that's been built out between Housing and Thriving Communities and the Lakewood Police Department Community Action Team with Division Chief Alish. You'll get an update about the Navigation Center, some things happening around the region, and then some recommendations that have come through. So to start us off here, comparing the 2025 and 2026 point in time counts for the benefit of folks who are viewing. I think largely council is familiar with the point in time as an exercise. This is an annual exercise reporting our best reasoned guesses on the scale of homelessness in our community, reported out to Washington. So every community in the nation does a point in time count at the end of January each year, where those communities draw data from shelter serving systems, but also deploy people out to the field to speak with people experiencing homelessness in encamped settings and unsheltered settings as well. All that gives us some numbered data and some qualitative data along the way. The big story between 2025 and 2026 is we did see an increase in the total count for the Jefferson County count. We moved almost 5% up within 1 year from 1,174 to 1,231. However, when we break it down into Lakewood's count within Jefferson County, we saw an almost 1/3 reduction of 31.5%. In 2025, 553 people were identified in Lakewood, as opposed to 2026 in January, when we identified 379. It bears mentioning that the count occurs at the end of January, so this isn't in a condition where we would have had the Navigation Center operating, but it was on an evening of severe weather activation when we were bringing people inside. Breakout here between the sheltered and then the unsheltered count: 246 unsheltered in 2025 compared to 229. So we see a little bit of a reduction there, as well as homelessness chronicity. So we saw a reduction of our chronic homeless share within Lakewood as well. They still comprise 41% of a total count. So if we're identifying somebody as chronically homelessness, typically that means they've spent homelessness for a year or more or had multiple experiences of homelessness within a 5-year period. 20% of folks in chronic homeless were identified in shelter in 2026 compared to 50% who were identified in 2025. These are different shelter operations that were pending on weather. So we didn't have a consistent running shelter program. So there is a little bit of noise in that comparison. Finally, what we want to identify here in the point in time count is a very, very strong proportion of people experiencing homelessness for the first time, but we did see decreases in that in Lakewood as well. So in 2025, unfortunately, 245 people fell into homelessness for the first time who were identified in the point in time in 2025, compared to 139 in this most recent count, which is not to diminish the tragedy of folks falling into homelessness in the first place. Other areas that we look at with a little bit more regularity around unsheltered homelessness, we did do the community needs survey in 2025, and I know council is pretty familiar that homelessness topped out among the priority needs or top concerns identified by Lakewood citizens in the 2025 community survey. So this question asked our citizens to name their top concern for City of Lakewood, and we tied in homelessness with concerns for population growth generally. And it bears mentioning here that the third and fourth pillars also involve our discussion, which are public safety and housing costs. But largely, 1 in 5 individuals, when asked through the survey what their top concern was for the City of Lakewood, identified homelessness. This chart is showing us trends in the staff and resident encampment reports. So this chart shows us since 2024 how many encampment reports have been filed through the GoGov system or initiated by city staff. In the 2026 pillar here, that teal section is a projection. Since we're only halfway into 2026, essentially we took that data and then we stacked 100% on top of that since we're halfway through the year. So we have actuals data that goes from January through June, but if that trend were to continue, that's what that teal section would represent. What we want to show here is the escalating number of encampment reports. The data does not show us the total number of encampments. So this isn't reflecting there's almost 6,000 encampments within the City of Lakewood, but instead it reflects the number of citizen and the staff-initiated reports of encampments. So one large encampment could produce many reports through GoGov from multiple citizens who are witnessing that encampment and calling it in. Also, any single resident could be producing multiple reports on an encampment throughout a year. However, it bears mentioning that between 2024 and 2025, there's a 63% increase in encampment reports, and we expect an 11% increase on top of that from 2025 if trends hold into 2026. Another thing that we can see in these bars here is that the encampment, the resident initiated encampment reports in the first 6 months of 2026 surpass the full annual total of resident initiated reports from 2024. So we are on course for potentially doubling the number of times when somebody is reporting into GoGov an encampment concern. So the Division of Housing and Thriving Communities has worked alongside the Lakewood Police to evolve strategies on homelessness to respond to the priorities of communities and to City Council. This work has been documented in brief as Homelessness, the Path Forward, a working strategic document, and it involves functional areas of outreach, rehousing, regulation, and encampment mitigation. The document may continue to evolve, but encompasses these key focus areas of homelessness response generally. The path forward speaks to these operational aspects of homelessness response, but it does not weigh in on the necessary strategies to fund and resource these areas. Here in this chart that represents these strategies, strategies are represented in green and blue on purpose. So the blue areas are focusing on how we engage voluntary services, relationships, and supports to people enduring homelessness directly. And the green areas involve managing the impacts of encampments and encumbrances in public spaces. These strategies involve the articulation of law and enforcement and solutions to so they involve largely the space and our police interactions. Our solutions to homelessness are to be found in how we approach and serve the people in the blue strategies. But at the same time, the viability of the public spaces is a responsibility of government and community. One of the consequences of homelessness is unmitigated privatization of public spaces by encampments and the encumbrance of those public spaces. So when people have their belongings stored within the public sphere, it creates the conditions where cities need to respond to make sure that those spaces remain unencumbered and usable by everyone. Our outreach programming, to move into that first category in the blue and the left outreach, our outreach programming consists of 2 homeless navigators within Lakewood Police Department's community action team, a homeless navigator in housing and thriving communities, or a housing navigator, and 1 street outreach case manager that's working under a state-funded contract at Recovery Works. The community action team navigators provide frequent contacts and deep case management services directly in encampments via a escort of Lakewood police agents. So they're typically on the response side of those GoGov calls that are coming in. The housing navigator in housing and thriving communities provides some of the administrative support to the community action team program to assure that their data carries and is tracked to the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, who's responsible for tracking outcomes for the entire 7-county region. Additionally, the housing navigator provides direct housing case management and support before and after housing is obtained. Recently, disruptions in a state program required the housing navigator staff's involvement in case coordination for a number of people who had already been placed into housing. This diminished their field-facing work for a few months, but they're currently restoring that work, and they're receiving referrals alongside CAT and community-based programs. Our Recovery Works provides a single street outreach case manager through state funds awarded to housing and thriving communities. In the last quarter of April to June, this position successfully housed 18 individuals directly from street outreach efforts, plus they placed 49 referrals into the VOA Navigation Center. This position is also going to see some turnover in the current quarter following a retirement of the staff and recently hired new staff to train in and onboard. Housing and Thriving Communities is currently developing its application to continue and potentially ask to expand this program through state funding. The municipal court, for other outreach presences, the municipal court also provides a monthly community court at Mount Air Church to assist resolving minor infractions while providing connection to a variety of coordinated services through the court. This has been a very effective service coordination initiative for individuals connected to our outreach partners, and was essential when we didn't have a space that convened partners together, such as the Navigation Center. Beyond the outreach program directly supported through City of Lakewood in these 4 positions, there's also a growing number of organizations that provide regular engagement with unsheltered residents of Lakewood, either directly or indirectly through mission-driven work. These organizations and initiatives also support a continuum of care or services to people in homelessness, And a few of these organizations are involved at the street level, providing services within encampment settings. So we talk about Stride Community Health, Jeffco Public Health, Mean Streets Ministries, the Purpose Project, Lakewood Left, and Armor of God Ministries are all familiar community groups that are also active in encampment settings. I am going to pivot over to District Commander John Alish, who can describe for us a little bit of the structure of the Lakewood Community Action Team and Lakewood Police.
Yeah, good evening and good to see everyone again. Can I get a thumbs up from someone? You're hearing me okay? Perfect, thank you. So yeah, I just want to add, first of all, I appreciate being here, and I'll comment that Chris and I and these teams have had a pretty amazing partnership when you consider how different our roles can be, but we found a way to work together to find a way to really improve things on the streets for those experiencing homelessness and those who are looking to exit it. You know, this is hard work, and I think we should celebrate whenever we can. Our homeless navigators keep a little sheet that shows how many people they permanently housed outside their offices, and they just hit 200. So that's pretty impressive that 2 people have permanently housed 200 people during their time working here. So we want to celebrate that for a minute. When you look at this org chart, it's just good. I know you're all familiar with the Community Action Team, but to give you an overview of how we work still and what we do. So what you see here is on the left, that's our homelessness response, primarily supervised by Sergeant Okamura, Kyle Okamura. He's one of our CAT sergeants. Navigator Griffin and Navigator Wallington. So Matt Wallington and Princess Griffin work for him, along with 2 of our agents who are dedicated full-time to this work, and Agent Alfano and Agent Preen. We also have Agent Miller and Agent Egdorf, who spend about 50% of their time on that. So really, we have the equivalent of 3 full-time agents dedicated to doing this work. And as Chris mentioned, that's working in the field, trying to balance that opportunity to allow people opportunities to exit homelessness while also working on responding to those encampment requests from the community. We also run our Prevail. If you guys have heard of LEAD before, it's now under Prevail, but that's our criminal diversion program, which allows folks who engage in low-level criminal activity, who maybe have a history of doing so, to divert from that into intensive case management. And that's run by our 2 case managers, Katie Yunker and Ms. Freiling. And then again, those agents are 50% dedicated there. Also in CAD is where we've branded them as Spark Mental Health Co-Response. So those are our mental health co-responders with Supervisor Susie Newby. And then we actually just recently lost our other full-time co-responder. He decided to move to the East Coast, but we're ready to hire 3 in the next about 2 months here. We should be staffed up again with a supervisor and 3 co-responders, in addition to 2 agents that are full-time dedicated to co-response in the field with them. And then finally, National Night Out, community outreach, all those things we engage with, that's handled by our community policing section under the Community Action Team by Sergeant Current, and that's the 2 officers listed there. So they are working to get ready for an awesome National Night Out at the beginning of August. Now I'm just going to turn it back to Chris, who's going to kind of go over this service continuum and get into more of that blue shaded section on the path forward.
So we have 2 sections in the, thanks, John. We have 2 sections in the strategy document in that blue section. What we've covered so far was just that outreach component. Moving into service continuum, the foundations of our homelessness response, they need to be based on an abundant and well-coordinated system of programs that can engage through a variety of different circumstances. There's no single program that alone can change or shift economic and social issues that are drivers of homelessness in any city, including our navigation center. But that's not to say that homelessness isn't solvable. It is. Solutions aren't hard to conceive and think of, but they are hard to resource and to navigate. A service continuum conceived as a system has at least 4 areas that, functioning together, will reduce homelessness. Not every area will apply to every case. We may have an outreach worker who can place somebody directly into housing and bypass a navigation center. And if that's the shortest path, we definitely want to do that. But all of the areas, they need to all function in relationship to one another and function systemically. We're also often tempted to resolve homelessness generally through treating one aspect that may be a contributive or just a co-occurring factor alongside someone essentially not having a rentable housing unit. So addiction treatment or jobs or healthcare are often invoked and also pitted against one another to fix the issue, the bigger issue of homelessness. And in reality, there's truth in each of those, and responses to those conditions are also essential across all the 4 functioning areas of a system. So without categories of employment, behavioral health, addiction support, and primary healthcare access, things may also fall apart. But that said, most people who are unemployed are in homes, or most people who are struggling with addiction are in homes, or with behavioral health are in homes, or otherwise sick. Most people who are sick are also in homes. Homelessness response needs to include those other responses, but the focus and the difference needs to be approached through prevention, outreach, navigation centers or coordinated access points, and permanent and deeply affordable housing. And we're going to go through each one of these, but a couple of things on the front end of that. These together are just one part of that bigger way forward document on homelessness. Also, as this system gets intentionally built, we need to constantly take a whole system approach and lens on this. Good solutions in any one of these areas may have bad timing for investment in some of the other areas. So we need to scale all of these areas together. So for instance, if we have an outpaced surge on outreach and creating connections in those encampments, it may be disruptive to the navigation center that has a finite capacity, right? All of it, of course, depends on that end of availability of housing. So let's step into homeless prevention. So as mentioned through the point in time overview, our most recent estimate found at least 139 individuals on a single night who were experiencing homelessness for the first time. While there are a number of reasons that an experience of homelessness might start, we know that financial factors are the most common, with an inability to pay rent being the primary reason people lose housing. Prevention strategies often start at this point through eviction prevention programs that keep people within housing units before they fall into homelessness altogether. Prevention efforts are additionally important for Lakewood's context because facility-based care for single adults is reserved to engagement with our Housing Navigator team, who are focused in unsheltered homelessness response. To access our navigation center, the pathway comes through that engagement with a navigator. Eviction prevention might best be delivered through community-based organizations or at the point of institutional access, such as eviction courts, human services, or community-based organizations responding to poverty more generally. It's a huge, if understated, win if we can ensure an experience of homelessness doesn't touch a household to begin with. What we're doing now is currently soliciting proposals for up to $150,000 in one-time eviction prevention programming. The proposals for this are actually due in tomorrow for consideration. The funds are going to be prioritized to an organization with an existing eviction prevention program, and the goal is to accelerate a program during the upcoming severe weather months between October and April for Lakewood residents who are at the cusp of an eviction. Historically, eviction prevention has been administered through Jefferson County Human Services. So Jefferson County Human Service provides expertise and gives us some learning experience from a better scaled response to eviction. Federal funds moved through Jefferson County Human Services as part of the nation's response to COVID to prevent evictions in the region. And between April of 2021 and May of 2025, Jeffco Human Services moved nearly $29 million. Nearly $29 million was dispersed to 2,507 households in Jefferson County. Almost half, 47% of households resided within Lakewood, and the majority of households were very low income, making less than 30% of AMI. And so this is in our pretty recent history of being able to operate a more scaled program. Jefferson County Human Services, they implemented 2 program models during this period. Their initial response, like everything at the time, focused on quick distribution of assistance to households. A second program model leveraged assistance through direct attendance to court, providing coordinated access for follow-up services to households seeking assistance. It's the second deepened and more system-focused response model that should be pursued locally. Coordinating with the county's expertise and experience in administration of assistance may be a longer-term and more sustainable goal than Lakewood just picking up a new eviction program on our own. But for now, we're going to release the $150,000 through the upcoming severe weather season, which is just a little more than at its high point what Jefferson County Public Health was distributing in a single week during COVID. In a single week, they would have been moving $137,000 to Jefferson County neighbors as an emergency intervention. Moving out of prevention and back into our outreach strategy. So if we weren't able to prevent an eviction and somebody is in a condition of homelessness, we're still out building those relationships from the beginning of someone's experiencing of homelessness. So within the service continuum, outreach involves the teams that we previously mentioned. And the strongest outreach programs have capacity to remain relationships-based with people in encampments and engage in a variety of situations and contexts of homelessness response. The CAT team navigators, they're gold standard outreach professionals that are partnered with law enforcement activity. Recovery Works is equally exceeding their income outcomes while situated within a community-based provider, a nonprofit, right? So outreach can come to us in different formulations. Not all community-based outreach teams, though, are housers. We're focused on housing navigation specifically. Some outreaches are mission-driven or mission-focused on distribution of basic needs and not on case management. Others on peer support and recovery services, and yet others on proven public health approaches to morbidity from overdose or bloodborne infections associated with drug use. Professional consideration within the limits of law, within the limits of what's legal, needs to remain between the missions and the functions of all the outreach programs operating on the streets. To the extent that partnerships are willing, a collective impact model of cross-sector collaboration should be developed to help define our common agendas where they exist, reinforce these professional considerations, and develop clear and accountable operational strategies that avoid interference in the unique missions and specialties of individual programs. That's a long way of saying the sandbox is big out there, has a number of players, and we do best by learning to play together. Moving from our outreach to navigation centers, this is where we're doing exceptionally well. Important to define what a nav center is still. Navigation centers are facility or site-based programs operating 24/7, 365 that provide alternatives to unsheltered homelessness through the provision of shelter and professional case management. At this time, City of Lakewood, in thankful partnership with the state and with Jefferson County, has activated the county's first navigation center under contract with Volunteers of America. An intergovernmental agreement will be negotiated through the region to partner ongoing sustainable funding for the program. And meanwhile, we're optimistic for a stopgap agreement with those partners for shared funding through 2027. As you're aware, at the recent spring forum of the area decision makers convened by the county gave a second priority following homelessness prevention services to identifying a second navigation center that's outside of Lakewood and pooled operational funding for both the current program in Lakewood and any second program that's identified. Lakewood remains also a partner throughout the region in severe weather shelter programming with other Jeffco County jurisdictions through an IGA, intergovernmental agreement led by Jefferson County. Additionally, this year, local faith communities are organizing toward a very modest shelter capacity during cold weather to provide emergency backstop to severe weather programming. We anticipate that there's going to be potential for these faith communities to apply for funds from the Intergovernmental Severe Weather Sheltering Partnership to assist these operations, but the detail on that is still being negotiated. I want to jump back to the Navigation Center a little bit. One of the questions I get asked, which makes a lot of sense, is where are people coming from and who are we serving? So I did poll from March 10th, our very first date, what the total enrollments have been, the total intakes have been. So since starting March 10th up to July 14th, a few days ago, 177 individual guests have enrolled at the Navigation Center. These enrollments, of course, to rehearse, come through street-based navigators throughout the entire county. What we can say, and we do track the referral sources for all intakes into the center, is that the program has received Lakewood Navigator and Outreach referrals for 3 out of 4 program participants, or just shy of 3 out of 4 program participants. So the majority of individuals who have intaked into the Nav Center are indeed residents in the city of Lakewood being engaged by our Lakewood Outreach program. Some outcomes to look at, and I'm going to temper this. We've been operating for 4 months, so we don't have longitudinal quantitative outcomes to really communicate. We are seeing some really exciting qualitative outcomes. Demographically, since March 10th, the average age of guests is 46, and this is an amazing thing to me. The ages spanning from our youngest intakes to our oldest spans over 5 decades. Our youngest intakes, we've had a couple of 24-year-olds, and our oldest intakes have been 77. I think we had a 77-year-old woman and man. On gender, we are hitting kind of what we aimed at, and what we anticipated is we're close to 70% women, or 70% men, pardon me, and 30% women is what we were anticipating. We're very close into that area at 67 and 33% splits. Currently today, the program is at 92% capacity and has sustained above its 85% capacity for a number of weeks. So we're emerging from a ramp-up phase of the new program to being able to operate in a stabilized capacity. This is going to have impacts and a little bit of shift on that flow of folks into the program, because we're going to have to start managing for bed turnovers and such, and we're going to have to start a queue of those contacts to come in from Navigator programs. The program is serving guests with high needs, but we have found housing successes within those 4 months, particularly among individuals that are coming in with higher health and financial capacities. So this may be some of those folks who are experiencing homelessness for the first time, who maybe do have some resources or are remaining gainfully employed, that need just that lighter assistance, shallower assistance towards permanent housing. Guests have obtained employment opportunities for welding, flagging, for hospitality, those types of employment opportunities, and the CAT team has assisted with certifications to excavator operation and forklift operation to help people identify new skills to assess their path out of homelessness. And one kind of championing thing that I didn't expect within our first 4 months, but one guest arrived in and has completed his first college credit at Red Rocks Community College. So some folks are pursuing those paths as well to find their way off the street. Another area to look for successes of the Navigation Center isn't just those individual successes that we are able to affect in people's lives, but before the Navigation Center existed, there were a number of organizations who were finding ways to do good in our community, but they were unassembled. They were not, they had no kind of convening space or any real galvanizing place to coordinate their work. The Volunteers of America, kind of living up to their name, have been great connectors of this community energy to bring supports under the same roof. I'm not going to read through all the partnerships on the screen here, but as you read or glance at it, just noting the diversity of different initiatives that have come and had a hand in the day-to-day work of the Navigation Center is amazing. And the number of different types of volunteers that are arriving, from high school students to faith communities and healthcare workers, has been pretty incredible, and doesn't happen when we don't have the facility and the place to do it. Doesn't happen as easily. All this is to say that we've experienced a lot of great things happening under the Navigation Center, and yet there are identified challenges with this program. We knew stepping into it and communicated that the program was not being stood up as a clinically based program, and we do struggle with behavioral health and substance use issues with the population that we're serving. Volunteers of America, independent of the city, is pursuing solutions for this to bring certified addictions counselors under the roof. And if I were to grow the program in any way, I'd probably expand upon that or help build momentum behind that to see if we could reach even for potentially a clinical director in the space. Additionally, neighborhood integration. The space it's another thing that we knew moving into the space, is that we don't have a backyard in the space. We have inside, and then outside is our community. So continuing to do the work of identifying ways that the up to 100 guests that we have and are accountable for under the Navigation Center have positive ways to interact with the neighborhood beyond Colfax, being beyond Colfax, participating as neighbors in the city. Much thanks to Ward 1 and Ward 2 for hosting their ward meeting last week at the Navigation Center. It was an incredible example of some of the work that we can do within that area. So moving on from outreach, Navigation Centers, prevention to housing. Availability of deeply affordable and sustainable supportive housing opportunities are a primary challenge in homelessness response work, no matter where you're going in this nation. The paths to permanent housing outcomes differ by situations, and sometimes the outcome can be found without entering a lease, such as when a navigator is successful at safely reunifying someone with a family member. That happens too. But most of the time, housing success depends on the availability of a deeply affordable unit, especially for individuals who are aging or who are otherwise unable to sustain employment or re-enter the workforce. At the same time, covenants on existing affordable housing risk expiring, leaving those units vulnerable to changes in the market rate. Lakewood committed to increase or preserve 475 affordable housing units between 2023 and 2026 under Proposition 123. Currently, we have only tracked 107 newly constructed affordable units in this time period, and we'll be consulting with Proposition 123's team on how to count preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing that is not subject to affordability covenants to increase that number. The state's Department of Local Affairs, however, is going to offer an adjustment waiver that allows local communities to recalculate the goal based on broader economic and local market conditions and the history of building permits pulled within the community. That waiver, which is being pursued by a number of Colorado communities, we are certainly not the only community in this situation, but that waiver would bring Proposition 123's goal within grasp of Lakewood's recent development, with a suspected goal of a 61 unit increase in the next 3-year cycle that'll run 2027 to 2029. But what are we doing? We've identified those 107 newly constructed affordable units. We've implemented an expedited development review policy. We were on the early side of doing that for affordable housing submittals. allowing these projects to move to permit approval within 90 days. The Housing Policy Commission continues to refine the policy-making options to designate or dedicate funding to meet affordable housing needs. Additionally, in August of 2025, we received recommendations in the Housing Policy Commission around inclusionary zoning to require affordable development or payment of a fee in lieu. Those recommendations also noted the need, however, to pair additional cost mitigation to development projects, including dedicated revenue to provide gap financing to affordable projects. To provide a more formalized look at the nexus between our city's growth and the need for housing, a formal nexus study is being completed to inform the policymaking process. That completion is expected in October of 2026 this year. We've also hired a new position, an affordable housing planner, identified to my division, Housing and Thriving Communities. This affordable housing planner is providing essential capacity to my team to be a first and ongoing point of contact for affordable housing projects and build our division's profile as good partners in the work of advancing affordable housing. Additionally, there are policies and procedures in place for the city of Lakewood to exercise a first right of refusal or first offer for some multifamily properties that may move to sell upon expiring affordability covenants. And while we have policies and procedures, we do not have a way to quickly mobilize resource around that. But we are at ready, given resource and interest for doing that. And finally, pardon the typo on this last bullet, but the city properties at 8745 and 8755 West 14th Avenue should be included there. Those are the Action Center properties where they're currently residing until February. They are envisioned for potential housing development in the future upon Action Center vacating the site and moving to Emory School for their next project. These have been very much in pre-planning and even pre-vision for the space. All we know about this is that we are looking to develop them to meet the housing need, but there has been no advanced form of what that would look like, and we look forward to being in close contact and communication with local communities on that as it moves forward. So here's a level set slide. You've seen this figure before, but it's important to take a pause here because we are going to make a pivot. The next sections are moving us into categories of regulation and the mitigation of encampments. So these sections involve the condition of public spaces. So this is not how we're approaching people towards voluntary services, but this is very much about spaces that result from increases and or concentration of unsheltered homelessness in communities. The approaches here are going to involve regulatory changes and operational approaches that we would like to propose to ensure public spaces remain viable to the general public while also enforcing regulation in the city of Lakewood. And I want to say that this is where discussions on homelessness become challenging, as regulation and enforcement does affect lives experiencing homelessness and the broader communities that also share the space. It's worth mentioning that the trending increase in reports on encampment do not always contain complaints about people who are experiencing homelessness, but they do summarily involve complaints about the condition and usability of encamped areas in parks, sidewalks, and other public areas. So we want to walk through some of the current policy limitations and what their consequences are and provide options to consider for clearer and a more effective approach. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Division Chief Alish. He's still on.
Absolutely, Chris. So thank you. And I want to say a lot of this is informed by discussions we've had. Some of the members of this council and I have been at community meetings, whether they be specialized to a certain topic or just more generally. And as we move forward as a city and as, you know, for housing and thriving communities and the police department, we want to find a way to serve all. And so what we talk about here is just how do we look at regulation and camp mitigation in public spaces and try and make it valuable for everyone. Can you guys hear me okay now, or am I still low? Okay, good. Thank you. So when we talk about this, and Chris and I talked about this recently as we built this presentation, communities facing challenges around homelessness often experience a pendulum effect. The community swings one direction, you know, let's say in an effort to help the homelessness issue and those experiencing homelessness into better situations, but to the detriment of the larger community. And then when that larger community speaks up or it reaches a tipping point, the pendulum swings really hard back the other way to the detriment of those experiencing homelessness. And I think where we try and come from is we don't want to be a pendulum when it comes to this kind of work. We would rather be envisioned as scales. Like, think of scales where you're saying, let's try and find a balance that works for everyone. And so as we move forward, we want to talk through that. We need to balance compassionate, dynamic systems for those experiencing homelessness with reasonable regulations and enforcement that ensures the public spaces in the community are safe and accessible to all. So residents, businesses, and visitors. Another way to think about this tension is to acknowledge that the question isn't about whether or not we enforce laws or whether or not we provide services. It's how do we do both? And how do we do both in a way that's helpful to those experiencing homelessness and also those people in the community who choose to live in that area. So ultimately, robust, empathetic homelessness services can exist in a community that is regulated to ensure businesses flourish, people fill their community parks, and sidewalks and rights of way are passable by all. So Chris, if you could go to the next slide for me, please. So here's some current challenges we're facing, just so everyone has an idea of what we're dealing with. Current regulations do not permit law enforcement to maintain encumbrance or personal storage expectations in public spaces until 24 hours have passed. So this is except where additional regulations or legal violations are involved. So a good example of this is our current ordinances say that until property has been in place in a public area for more than 24 hours, that's not a violation of any ordinance, unless you already have a park rule or a right-of-way violation. But I know I've worked with some of you on council who have brought forward concerns from your constituents about, hey, there's a person in this field and we want to know how to address that because it's making our neighborhood uncomfortable. And we've come back and said, unfortunately, with the laws as they're written, there is no violation, because if they keep leaving before the 24 hours pass, it's not a violation of our current law. So we just wanted to bring that up as one of the challenges we're facing. Another one is the second one. Lawful orders to vacate a space are provided to individual encampments and not to the wider group. So an example of this is with the classic way we've handled these, if we have an encampment, let's say with 3 tents, we as a CAT team will go in and put yellow cards on those 3 tents and say, you are hereby advised that your camp is here unlawfully. You have 24 hours to clean it. We come back the next day, there's now 4 tents or 5 tents. Because we didn't mark those extra 2, we clean the first 3 and we have to leave the other 2 until another 24 hours have passed. And what that does is it creates the environment where the public is like, okay, wait, they came and cleaned up half of it, but the other half is still there. And then that can create a problem downstream where now those remaining camps are seen, and other people experiencing homelessness see that and say, oh, I can camp here too. And it's this kind of this never-ending cycle. So that's why you'll see some of these encampments develop and last a long time. It's inconsistent, it's unclear and unpredictable. We would rather move to more of an area marking. And then the third bullet point, and I know that the mayor talked about this in her State of the City address when she was speaking to the community, that the community's been heard on this point, is once vacated, areas cannot remain unencumbered due to the inability to prevent returning encampments. So often blocks are re-encamped within the same day. We'll actually go out and spend hours cleaning up a block, and then the citizens will report to us, or the residents, business owners will report to us 8 hours later, yeah, they were back. They're back now. There's no indication sometimes that it has been cleared. Encampments have become heavier and more crowded because of that, because as they start to develop, they can continue to increase. This has resulted in the frustrations recognized, like I said, by the mayor and by others as we talk through those things with our businesses, communities especially, right? Because they're trying to operate a business on a block and they're saying this is really affecting that. Next slide, please. So I brought up some of the issues we're facing, not all of them, but some of the key ones. And I want to talk about some solutions that we have identified as good options. So we're proposing ordinance and policy changes to allow encumbered areas to be approached through clearly communicated area enforcement. So when I mentioned before, if we just mark one tent and then we have to mark the next one the next day, we'd rather mark an area for cleanup and make it perfectly clear to anyone walking into that space. This has been designated as an area that's set for cleaning. This will allow for scheduled outreach efforts during that time, and also allow for immediate lawful orders once we've reached that point. We also want to correct some loopholes. So I mentioned the loophole earlier of the person who was camping in that field or drainage area, and we're like, sorry, this is a perfect loophole for this. We want to address that as well. So we would like to approach the concept of permanently identified areas that could be established through historically high encampment numbers and or high service supports. So this could be your Colfax corridor. This could be where there's high service supports to benefit, like the communities surrounding the navigation center, where these are the communities that feel the impact of this the most. And when I say historically high encampment numbers, the service request system gives us a map of how these things look, and over the months, what do these encampment reports look like? And it looks pretty darn similar every time. We know that it's generally going to occur along Colfax, 2 to 3 blocks north or south of, out to about Wadsworth, maybe a little west of, and then up and down Wadsworth slightly to about 6. We'll have some other areas, but that Ward 2 region is disproportionately impacted. And so we're looking at options for that. Also, encumbered areas could be identified and posted for a period of time during which outreach professionals could focus on engagement. So this is what we've seen other communities do, where instead of posting for 24 hours and coming back and cleaning, we say, hey, we're going to give you 3 days for this area, but we're going to do a lot of intensive outreach and casework in those 3 days to try and help people out of homelessness. One thing I will mention real quick here, because I don't want it to be forgotten, no matter what we're talking about today, we always make outreach a part of our regulation activities. That's why we have our navigators embedded in our CAT team. So that way, when we're out doing that at field work, we can make sure that people always have opportunities to find that next step for them to better their situation. We also are looking at what would be called a cool-off period. So if it's not in a permanently identified encumbrance zone, this would help with areas where if someone says, hey, like 6 and Wads, I'll give that as an example. We all know for a while that was pretty extensive there. If we have an area that kind of a neutral third party, it may be through Housing and Thriving Communities or another group in the city, not the police department, if they recognize that, hey, this area has continued to be a problem and we need to give that community a cooling off period, when we clean it, we would say for the next 2 weeks or whatever we decided as a city, and it will result in immediate removal. So that way we don't have that return within 6 hours or turn within 24 hours. And as has kind of been described, that concept of it just moving, 8 feet or 10 feet down the block or one side of the block to the other, et cetera. Last one, ordinances can be amended to address trespassing on unimproved public property. So that's the one where I mentioned before, currently in the city of Lakewood, we do not have the authority to trespass people from unimproved public lands. So your drainages, maybe through the course of planning, we bought a field or we demolished a home and it's just sitting there vacant, filled with, just grass and everything like that. No intention of it being used as a community park, no intention of it being used for any authorized purpose. Currently, we can't post that as no trespassing. And so that would be a loophole as well that we would want to look at. Next slide, if you could, please. So this is one, and Chris may pop in here, but this is one we want to talk about. This gives you an idea of what we're speaking to. So this is that 14th Avenue corridor. On the left picture there, you can see some of the extensive encampments that can develop, blocking of the right of way. Oftentimes what will happen is it'll be balanced between avoiding the sidewalk just enough and being like in that tree lawn space. There's enough room for people to pass, but this can be a difficult situation for businesses, residents who want walkability. If we're talking about walkability of your neighborhood, the ability to walk to the grocery store, walk to other areas, people could feel uncomfortable walking on the public right of way in these kind of conditions. So we're always looking for ways to improve that. One way to improve it is with regulation, but like I said, these one-offs where we're just posting a tent and then cleaning it 24 hours later, posting a different tent without any sort of long-term encumbrance regulation or cool-off period results in it just kind of consistently occurring. And it's inefficient, it's expensive, and it doesn't bring the community, whether it be the residential community or the business community, the relief they need. So in that case, we either have to choose reasonable regulation that we can enforce, or we have to choose what you see on the right, which is this area of the community chose to move towards what we like to call hostile architecture, where they put in rocks that basically prevent people from encamping on that space. It works, but as we say here, it may permanently mitigate the encampments, but it needs to be balanced with your desire as a community for inviting aesthetically pleasing public spaces. And so what we're presenting tonight is there's balance again, if we're talking about the scales that I mentioned, between, you know, letting this activity continue and going all the way to a hostile architecture form. There's a balance in the middle with regulation. Chris, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of, what I worry about is, you know, this street is a street where for the better part of maybe 18 months, we were trying to take enforcement approaches and engagement approaches using the tools that we had in the box to do it. And ultimately, I feel confidence was lost in the city on our ability to provide an adequate enforcement response to control that and restore that area. And what I worry is that communities will just lean into more hostile landscaping of that area, right? And that becomes the solution for that one property, when really we could have found a better way to govern around this area and this space, to set expectations on that block. And that better way could have been better for the people within the encampment to be better engaged, have more predictability and the ability to plan around things, rather than planning to just be gone one day but then come back the next. It could have been better for how we communicate to the broader neighborhood around what we are trying to do to restore that public space and make it usable again. So
Thank you, Chris. If you could go to the final.
Over to next one.
Yeah, sorry. So this is kind of our final slide as we speak about this section. But as I said before, this has been informed by kind of identifying what's worked and what hasn't. On and off, as a leader, I've been involved with this work since roughly 2018. But I was even tangentially involved with it when we started addressing this in 2010. And the scope and the scale has just increased. And again, the needs to find that right balance. I'm really proud of all the work that our CAT team has done to help people experiencing homelessness. Like I mentioned, getting 200 people into permanent, housing, not just housing on paper, like we can say success, but real transformative housing. All the programs we're doing. At the same time, as a police department, it's our agency's job to help balance that with the needs of the wider community and find that right middle ground and not be that pendulum swinging back and forth. So really where we in speaking to the public and in having conversations with communities, with business owners, with business leaders, where everyone's come down to is our community deserves high quality, accessible, and usable public spaces for all, the housed and unhoused alike. And when Chris and I have talked about this, one thing he brings up that I think is exceptionally important to consider is allowing one group to privatize that space fails to meet that standard. And that's what starts to occur when we allow, public places, whether it be rights of way, parks, to privatize it through encampments. That can be problematic for the larger community. Maintenance of public spaces is a citywide responsibility requiring coordinated engagement between law enforcement and the Division of Housing and Thriving Communities. So we are in bi-weekly meetings, so twice a month, addressing this and finding out how as a city can we look at this holistically from a whole city perspective. This isn't a law enforcement problem. It's not a Housing and Thriving Communities problem. It's a City of Lakewood problem. So how can we address it? Operationally, custodial roles are dispersed throughout the city and cover different scopes of responsibility, right? We have parks employees who do the important parks work, streets employees who do streets and right of way, law enforcement who maintains enforcement and regulation across the area, and Housing and Thriving Communities that not only tries to help improving the housing opportunities, but still be a part of that community outreach effort. Chris will often hear from community members concerned about the tangential side effects of this issue. City leadership continues to discuss ways to identify those operational efficiencies. We're always looking for that. We want to make sure we have clean and safe public spaces, regardless of whether they're affiliated with an encampment or not, right? Everyone wants clean parks. Everyone wants clean right-of-ways. And then role definition, structure, and resource alignment remains critical for us to meet those common goals. So I want to thank you for hearing this part of it. I know, as Chris said, this is the more difficult part to talk about, but it's a necessary component that we see in the path forward.
Great, thank you for that highly informative presentation. Do you mind taking down your screen share? Thank you. All right, what questions do we have this evening? Counselor Sinks.
Thank you. Appreciate all that explanation and your work. And yeah, it's great information. So I appreciate that a lot. My question does refer to the last slide that was just covered about the mitigation of public spaces. And last Friday, council and staff received a letter from Tom Quinn, the Alameda Connects bid executive director, and I'm sure Bill Moreno there on West Colfax also has some input. So my question is, I wonder what conversations you've had with these two bids there on Colfax and Alameda, and what input they might have given you, if indeed you have had conversations with them, and what you might be implementing based on their input.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilor Sinks. We've been frequently in touch with largely the West Colfax Community Association bid, to a lesser extent Alameda Connects. But the input has gone bi-directionally. We've listened to the struggles of those business associations, the 40 West bid. We've also involved them in conversation with ideas about how things might look different, including what we presented here tonight. So,
and I'll just add, when I mentioned before that we've had those informative conversations with the community, Bill Moreno is one of those guys who really is a fan of Lakewood and believes in what the city does, but he also is a good speaker on behalf of the business community and the residential community, and he's spoken to that challenge that I said, that balance piece, where he's even said it feels like it's a little unbalanced right now, and the businesses that I represent are feeling like they need more support to ensure they can operate and have a vibrant business community in their neighborhoods. And so that's one of the reasons we bring all these things forward, is how do we find that balance? Because Bill included, without putting words in his mouth, feels like we're lacking that a bit right now to ensure that everyone has a chance to participate in Lakewood.
Great, thanks. Just a follow-up comment. So I wonder if you'll be reaching out then to Tom Quinn, and if you've read the letter and will be addressing some concerns that he's had.
yeah, we'll continue to be talking with both Bill and Tom, and I think their recommendations align to a lot of the content that we presented on here tonight for those who haven't had the opportunity to read the letters yet.
Great, thank you.
Staff, can you move Counselor Icruz back into panelist?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And then Counselor Black.
Yeah, thanks so much for this presentation. It's really informative. I also just want to touch really quick before I ask a question on how you started the presentation with the importance of housing strategies that maintain people in their homes. I think that's such a critical component that often gets overlooked when we're looking at sort of what's happening with our unhoused in our parks or along our sidewalks. But I'm so appreciative of the ways in which you're bringing that into the conversation and talking about things like the $150,000 request for proposals to help folks with rental assistance, which we really do know statistically is one of the biggest things that you can do to keep people housed, which is so much more cost effective and shorter term than having to try and take someone from a place of homelessness and try and bring them back into a home. So I'm really, really appreciative of that work. So I have one question to start. So you brought up 14th Avenue as an example. I actually live a block away from that street. I walk my 10-year-old on that street at least weekly, if not almost every other day. So I am deeply, I'm deeply embedded and a neighbor of, you know, the folks that are in and around that area. And I think one of the things you said, Chris, was you said something to the effect of some of the strategies that we used for 14th Avenue, they didn't help the businesses and the residents feel like we were necessarily doing a good job, and that it also didn't help the unhoused folks that were on that corridor during that 18th month period to feel like they had some security or some sense of what was happening. So I'm curious, with some of these things like cool off periods and area notifications that you suggested as some of these encampment mitigation strategies, can you talk a little bit about how that you think our unhoused populations might maybe have more guarantee or more certainty with some of these policies as well? I think it's easier for us to see how they would help Colfax Avenue businesses or help housed neighbors, but can you sort of talk to the overall experience of what it might do to our unhoused community as well?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's a very important one, and definitely appreciate the time to kind of walk through that. I think there's a big difference in an enforcement strategy that's based on whether it's a 72-hour notice, 48-hour notice, or 24-hour notice that gets placed upon a tent, or that gets told to somebody if they're lucky enough to be in engagement. They come back and they find that notice, and all of a sudden they have to plan in that moment for what the next step is. A lot of times, I think what we would see is that planning would be like, we'll move tomorrow and we'll return right to the area, and there wasn't a pace of engagement. I think what an area enforcement approach allows us to do is, what that looks like is, we could go week to week to week, and we can go out, we could actually post a map and signage of the area and ascribe to that any time period that we would want to, or we thought that's really needed to thoroughly engage the people encamped within that area. So those signs could advise somebody that in 7 days, you know, this area needs to be cleared for enforcement, right? And during that 7-day time, that allows us to have the focus to go in there and do things like, if what we want are like by name lists and close conversations around the needs of folks that are within that kind of cyclical encampment that's moving around the city, but never in one place long enough to really engage that way. That allows us the time to do that, with also kind of this turning point for that area, saying this is the date that we need this space cleared, and we need it cleared in an ongoing way. So to me, even, you know, and I don't want to sound like, you know, I'm trying to talk around it, because no matter what, unsheltered homelessness is going to increase your engagements with law enforcement. Encampment policies are going to increase your engagement with law enforcement, and that's potentially always going to be traumatic for the folks who are experiencing it. But the difference that's made in the ability for people to plan around those activities is incredible. So from the perspective with current operations, for the person who maybe had their structure tagged by a law enforcement agent saying that they need to be gone within 48 hours, but the tent that came and sat down next to them earlier today did not get posted and can stay, just creates a lot of confusion, a lot of inability to plan, and kind of overwhelms that situation with more of a sense of powerlessness and less engagement, right? And so that's kind of how I see this being like a better way to go about things. And it's not a request for more enforcement. Like, enforcement is happening every single day in Lakewood, in our city, but it is a request to kind of be able to structure this and do this differently in a way that gives people longer time to plan, and also gives a stronger assurance to the community that an impact is going to be made at the end of that 7 days, right?
Thank you. This is really helpful to understand it from the perspective of all of the different community members involved, from our local businesses to our housed residents, to our unhoused residents, and the ways that some of these policies and mitigation strategies might actually be beneficial in creating some certainty and guarantees for everyone involved. So that's super helpful. That's my only question at this time. I just also really quick wanted to say, for both Chris and John, I've worked with you off and on, and you are both such compassionate, engaged individuals. I know you've been thinking a lot about this and how to address it from a really community-based perspective. So I just wanted to make sure to say that out loud. I know that to be true with the interactions that I've had with both of you. So thanks so much.
Counselor Nystrom.
Thank you. Chris, well, I guess Chris and John, I'm a little curious if, from a budgetary and resource perspective, if you've started having discussions, or maybe this is something you're already accommodating, but you know, we emphasize cold weather sheltering, but what about hot weather sheltering and cooling places for people? I'm just wondering if that's been part of the dialogue that's already taken place, or if that's something that you're planning on doing going forward.
The document that Division Chief and I have been working on does not contemplate the resources that are how we identify and aggregate the resources to get there. It's mainly answering operational and programmatic pieces, as well as the regulatory section that we want to place recommendations on. But any change to the resources that would need to be found to make those adjustments has to be an ongoing conversation. In terms of the critical kind of sheltering interventions for severe weather and how they might apply to summer, very, very important thing to be thinking about, and not just because today's 100 degrees out, but we actually learn as a nation that there's higher risks of morbidity in severe heat among people than there is in the depth of winter for a lot of folks. So being able to get to a response during severe weather is important as well.
And I'll just add, I think that's one reason that we're blessed to have the navigation center, because it's a 24/7 operation, right? And it doesn't rely on telling people to leave at 7 a.m., you know, as the previous one did. And so, you know, the navigators and Chris's team have taken great pride in working so hard to get that thing filled up, so we can show that we've made that, you know, transformative life change in a lot of people's lives that previously didn't have access.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Lowe.
Yes, thank you. And I'm, you know, obviously council's identified addressing root causes of homelessness as a top 5 priority. You know, it's something we all hear about. So thank you so much for coming to this discussion with having done so much work and putting so much thoughtfulness into this. I do want to just take a beat to go back to the first half of the presentation. I mean, Chris, you lifted up in your sort of humble, matter of fact way a couple of stats that were actually news to me, including the really significant reductions we saw in at least a couple of categories in the point in time count from 2024 to 25, or excuse me, 25 to 26 rather. So I just wanted to say, I think that's encouraging. I also want to celebrate that the thing that Commander Alice just told us about our CAT team just having gotten their 200th person into long-term housing. I mean, those are awesome. Those are incredible wins. And I would encourage our staff to just kind of get us those things because we want to be able to kind of share those wins out with the community. I think I literally have been getting texts from people in the community in this study session being like, wow, that's incredible. So kudos. I mean, Chris, one thing I did want to ask, how do you account for the point in time numbers going down, but encampment reports going up dramatically during the same period? I'm sure you have a thought on that. Help us put those two things in context.
Yeah, point in time, it's a frustrating method, right? There's a lot of critique that you can leverage and throw at a point in time, particularly when you're only comparing two years, like I did at the beginning of the presentation. So admittedly, you cannot set trends between those two. And the reason for that is there are a number of points of noise within the method of a point in time. it has to occur on the same night every year that HUD tells you it needs to happen, right? And so for here in Colorado, the difference in late January could be a high of 60 degrees or a high of minus 10 degrees, right? And so you lose some of that consistency year over year over some of the environmental conditions that might weigh into account. You might have more people sheltered on the night that it was really cold, right? Or that another piece of that is the count tends to be volunteer driven. So depending on your volunteer base, are you going to cover as much area? One thing that can be said reliably about the point in time count is that it's always going to be an undercount, and there's always going to be somebody that you missed, and you're never going to know the scale of what you missed in that count. So there could be methodological pieces in that. That said, I think, much gratitude to the county for really anticipating around some of that and really trying to bring people inside on a point in time night to be counted, I think has been a big part of that. So having incentives for people to come inside for that night so that we can identify them may be part of the difference that we saw.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Did you want to, Commander Alice, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just add, as we talk to our navigators, it's a combination of things too. The point in time occurred at that time, but we also see a great shift of people between, we are a border town to the major municipal, and so you see people move a lot. And so when it's a point in time at one snapshot, depending on what other communities are doing around us, that can greatly affect the number of people we have present in Lakewood at any given time. And one thing we've definitely seen in the last year or two is an increase in the plainly visible homelessness. Those large encampments had gotten way larger, and so that's going to bring in more reports on that and requests for service surrounding when you have a half a block or an entire block encamped. It's just much more likely to draw calls. No different than any other police call for service, right? When it's plainly obvious, it becomes much more likely that people are going to report it.
Yep. One just quick thing that came up earlier in the presentation, Chris, when a service provider is selected for the eviction prevention RFP, would it be possible to just notify council? I suspect there's a lot of interest in who's going to be doing that work.
Yep, absolutely.
That'd be great. And similarly, I never want to create unnecessary work, but I am moved. I mean, we've all seen the point in time counts for Jeffco. Honestly, this is, I don't know that I've seen like sort of a direct breakout for Lakewood. How easy would it be to get council just like a trend line comparison to the point in time count from like 23, 24, 25, 26 for Lakewood? I think with all the caveats, the helpful caveats you offered around the limitations of the point in time count, I would be interested in just seeing where we are on like the 3 or 4 year trend line.
I think the drill down to a city level in the county is relatively new. So I don't know that I could go all the way back to say 2022 or something and be able to find how many people in the Jeffco point in time count were identified in Lakewood. But let me get back with the county and with Metro Denver Homeless Initiative to see what might be possible for us to see that trend. I know we can get that for Jefferson County. I just don't know if we can get it at the city level.
Great. No, I've seen it for Jeffco. Thank you so much. If there is a city pullout, I just think certainly for me, but perhaps for others on council, that would be of interest. But I also know you've got a lot going on. One other thing I wanted to drill in on for the moment, Commander Alish, and I'm sorry, Commander Alish, by the way, congrats on your promotion. Saw that news just the other day. Is Commander still appropriate? Should we give you a new rank, or can we still call you Commander?
I'm technically a division chief now, so feel
Chief,
free to call. Yeah.
Chief Alish. Great.
Yeah, there you go.
Chief Alish. There you go.
I'm still getting used to it too.
Chief Alish. Very good. Well, congratulations, Chief Alish.
Thank you.
And thank you for all your work on this. I did want to drill in on the point you made. So we have heard from prominent folks in the community, as Councilor Sinks already mentioned, folks at the bid are telegraphing that there are real concerns here. We're obviously getting it from our constituents. Like I really accept and totally endorse that we need to have a serious look at like updates to our ordinances that look at this more systematically. That all makes sense to me. I'm struggling a little bit with the tension between, on the one hand, you lean into this idea of like proactive outreach. We're always going to do proactive outreach. Our CAT team is always going to be out there telling people that something's going to happen before it happens. But what I also heard from you is one of the pain points is when we go and tag a tent and give people 24-hour notice, that gets really messy because it becomes unworkable to like be required to always provide 24-hour notice before we tell someone in an encampment that they have to move. I suspect that there's some nuance here that you can like unpack for us about how those two things can be true at the same time. But I know that folks in the community are going to ask me, well, if it's really true that they're that committed to providing community response, why is it such a problem to always sort of tag an encampment or a tent or someone with possessions and give them 24 hours notice before enforcement commences or the possessions are actually moved? Help me square that circle.
Sure. So I think the problem we have is ultimately all the systems aren't working together in an appropriate way. And one thing I'll go back to that Chris mentioned, and one thing that we like to talk about in policing is procedural justice. And what that states is basically people don't always agree with what happens, but they want to be heard and they want to know the why. And so part of what we're trying to do is get a better why so people can understand, like, here's the expectations and here's the reality. As we deal with this 24-hour notice, like he said, if one person gets it and then the next person doesn't, they're like, so he can stay, but I have to go? What changed? Well, he showed up 2 hours later than you and didn't get that notice, so he gets to remain for another 24 hours. So that's one of the problems we face. Another problem we face is just understanding the rules to where people are like, okay, if they're not going to clean it up today, that means I have another week until they clean it up next time. And so I can kind of extend this. And it just creates this world where people don't feel like they understand what the plan is. So the idea is if we have a posted notice for an area, anyone entering that area is going to see that, and say, okay, this has been identified. For the public, the way it's going to help is right now we have a problem with telling people what's happening with their camp complaints because we get so many of them, as you saw, thousands, and we're expected to find a way to turn around and provide good customer feedback to all of our community members who report those. It would be better to do an area posting where people can see that area has been posted and will be cleaned and when it's going to be cleaned. Why? So a lot of it's communication. The outreach doesn't change, and maybe we can get into the nuance of your question a little bit, because why I say outreach always applies is we're never going to take away the option for someone to have a better situation for them. So the navigator, unless there's a safety concern, like a person who's experiencing homelessness threatened one of our navigators, and they're like, I can't work with that person. They've personally threatened me. They always have the chance to get into that nav center to seek permanent housing. That comes alongside enforcement. And that's what makes us a little bit different. It's not the enforcement group showing up, the navigators on the other side. We come as a team, and the idea is at any point we can get you into the services you need. We just need you to work with the community on the other part. And the way I like to describe this when I meet with the community is we just want everyone to be a part of the community and have a role in it. And when we set those standards and we understand our roles, we can better achieve clarity across the groups. And I know that may not have answered it at all, and I'm sorry.
No, well, let me ask it this way, because I do think this is an incredibly important point. I understand the point about sort of thinking about this more place-based, location-based corridors, sort of providing notice in an area rather than a specific possession, a specific person, a specific tent. But do you, just as someone who clearly has been thinking about the actual, like, where the rubber meets the road of this on the ground, like, is there an issue with nevertheless requiring when anyone from the city goes into an area where there is an encampment, like making sure that even if it's rather than to a specific tent, to the general area, providing like a 24-hour sort of notice for that area that there's going to be a relocation before the relocation occurs? Because it's just, I mean, I am cognizant about the experience of, I mean, it's one thing to say, well, notice will always be provided. But, I've been around the block enough to know that sometimes in sort of the fog of actual implementation, the best of intentions don't always translate into like the lived experience of people on the ground. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can shift to this more regional sort of location-based approach, but also make sure that for an existing encampment, we are always providing some notice that they're going to be relocated before folks come in and basically are told you've got to leave immediately.
So I think that's where we need to decide what does our communication posture look like, and how do we set rules that everyone's aware of? So as it exists now, we always provide the notice. The exception is if there's if it's like, if they can't, we've had people's camps encroach literally into the public right of way where a car can't drive down the street. We'll immediately remove that as an encumbrance because you can't block the public right of way. We're moving that way with sidewalks too. It's like, if you're literally blocking a sidewalk, this is an ADA issue. We can't do that. But otherwise they do get the 24-hour notice. And I think that's one reason our community sometimes feels frustrated is we're always very careful to abide by that, to the point where sometimes it feels like, why is this taking so long? And the reason is because we follow that notice guideline. And also one thing that we've done in the past is if it is going to be severe weather, we do not clean because we say it's not appropriate to clean during a severe weather event. So we're going to wait until that event ends, and that pushes it to the next time. To your question about how do we ensure notice always occurs, that's where we're bringing ideas to you and we need to discuss them. If we went to a permanent encumbrance zone, that would have to be broadcast. It would have to be communicated. There would have to be a grace period. One thing that we benefit from in Lakewood is we have a really good dialogue with those experiencing homelessness. People always feel like we're approachable and they can speak to Matter Princess along with our CAP members and have an honest conversation about what are the expectations and what's the reality. So if we ever went to permanent encumbrance with immediate removal, that'd take a lot of education, that would take signage, and that would take appropriate notice. Cool off periods, similarly. But we're looking at that to try and get past this issue where it just keeps moving 24 hours. Now this one move bin, now it's 24 hours more, and these camps exist for a long time. But that's what it would take.
Okay. I don't have an objection, just a final point on this for the moment. I don't have an objection to sort of the location-based encumbrance approach. I just want to make sure that if we are moving that direction, it really is broadcast and communicated really robustly, like in advance before it gets imposed. And Chief Alish, the point you made, I actually think is like the single most critical point in this entire discussion. What is really, really important to me, particularly if we're moving in this direction, if we're leaning a little bit into some of these enforcement tools, is that it is always true that if there's an individual that's told to relocate or told they can't sleep somewhere, it's essential that they be offered an alternative place where they can sleep. Sure. And so that could look like a bed in the Nav Center. It could look like Matter Princess or someone on the CAT team offering them shelter somewhere else. It could look like, assistance getting into housing, but like getting into housing that night, not in 2 months. It could frankly also look like some sort of planned campsite somewhere else in an appropriate place, should that prove feasible, or a pallet home or something like that. But one thing that is not acceptable to me is for our police or anyone employed with the city to come to someone who's unhoused and say, you can't be here. And if they say, well, where can I be? For them to say, I have no idea, but you can't be here. They have to be given an answer for where they can go. That is an absolute red line for me in terms of on just a basic humanitarian principle. And the good news is, I think, because of all the work that you and Chris have been doing, it feels to me like that is in reach of actual execution. But I want to make sure that's happening in reality, not in theory.
Yeah, and I think, Councilman, the one thing I'll say to that's a challenge for us, and this is, like I said, where it gets sticky and we all have to work on this together, is we have about 10 or 15 people in Lakewood that we've been working with as navigators for a while now, and they're just not wanting to go to the Nav Center. So then that's the question of what's next, right?
If they have an option and they're given that option and they refuse to take that option, that is another thing entirely.
Okay. And that's why I just wanted to kind of level set that piece and say we have that currently that we're experiencing, and that's a good thing for us to talk about.
I understand. And for the folks in the community out there watching this, I mean, look, I think we have extremely robust evidence that, when it comes to the most persistently unhoused population, upwards of 85% of people on the streets, when given an option for shelter in the appropriate context from a community partner who trusts them, who they trust, which is an important part of this discussion, will take the shelter or the housing, and about 15% won't.
Yep.
So it's a real problem. And I also want to be clear that it's the overwhelming majority of people that are persistently unhoused will take shelter if it's offered to them in the right sort of trauma-informed way. Anyway, happy to come back to that discussion, but it feels to me that point and how we do that is like the most important pivot, sort of hinge point of this entire discussion.
And I appreciate that. Just setting the tone early is great. Thank you.
Counselor Cruz.
Thank you. And echoing the gratitude for the presentation, I think the amalgamation of information we got. Like, that is a lot of work that went into that for both of you. So thank you, because I think that even that understanding of how these pieces are fitting together and how the needle is being moved is incredibly valuable. And frankly, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of the feedback that we got at our ward meeting, but the top line thing that we heard from people is most people don't know what we're doing. And I think that speaks to how we communicate about the work and the challenges we're facing, but also the successes. So just wanted to highlight that off of the front. Just to circle back to kind of the discussion that Councillor Lowe started with, that I really kind of appreciated the points you were making there. I just want to clarify at this moment in time, if you're marking up an encampment, you're telling somebody they have to move, do we have enough housing resources for anybody who wants to go into housing from the street to get housing?
Thank you, Councillor Cruz. That's important to mention, that no, we don't. And respectfully, it's the question before us isn't enforcement or not enforcement. It's mainly how we're approaching the enforcement problem. But enforcement is happening routinely in the city of Lakewood right now, and we are posting areas not guaranteeing somebody the bed at the NAP center, or not guaranteeing a place in a pallet home or housing within the same day, right? So we're not meeting that bar even as it is currently.
I appreciate that. And I just wanted to state that plainly, not that either of you were indicating otherwise, but just I think something we hear frequently in the community is really focusing on that resource resistant population, when in fact, we don't have the resources to move everybody who wants to move off of the street, right? And so when we're talking about enforcement and we're talking about those things, I think that that's really important for people to understand, because frankly, I don't think everybody understands or accepts that point. I think to that question, like for the targeted enforcement areas, I understand that could provide some predictability that's being asked for from some of our business associations, and obviously, runs through corridors of my district, and I hear from those constituents all the time. I guess a concern I have based on some of the targeted enforcements that have been done previously, right, is without a place to put all of those people, they just become a new areas issue, right? And so I'm just curious, like with the implementation of this type of a protocol, what do we think without an option for people to go somewhere else is going to be the consequence of having some of these like business corridors or hotspot corridors kind of being marked more permanently as places where people can't camp?
Yeah, I think those are very real concerns. And like I said, and tried to emphasize, like this is where the conversations on homelessness and policy get really, really difficult, right? Because you are going to see, as soon as you have a space where it's needing enforcement, and whether it's a cool-off period or longer term, those people don't disappear. They don't become housed because their life got harder. So you are going to anticipate seeing some migration, maybe breakup of large camps into smaller camps. Those are all things that could happen. And I'd love to do a follow-up conversation to explore that more, but I understand there's a schedule for tonight too. So I want to make sure that we're hitting on that as well. But please do follow up with me on those.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I appreciate just all of these things, right? We always have to contend with these kinds of trade-offs in the work we do with the resources we have. And so I just want that to be clear for anybody watching and for all of us who are making these decisions together, right? That like, if you push, I've just seen it, right? Like when Iber was an enforcement zone, more people were in Two Creeks, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's going to be really important for us as we have any policy conversations going forward. And building off of something that Councillor Lowe brought up as well, I think like we'll be most effective if we extend the continuum of what options we have for people with more low barriers, such as an unsanctioned encampment, like has been done in Alamosa, has been done in Denver, has been done in Ithaca, and a lot of different cities, or other options to provide a wider range of resources, right? Like we're not going to be able to afford to create another navigation center. We're looking to our other municipal partners to work on that. And we're pushing for that, right? But I do think we need more Lakewood specific policies, and would love to continue to explore that with all of you. So I'll just name that off the front, that I think that I heard on how these could help with the enforcement that's already happening and that's going to be happening, and like what can we do to shake up the status quo a little bit more as well.
I think I'll just add, I want to speak to both what Councilor Lowe said and you now. It is so important that we find places where people can be. And that's one thing we've really appreciated about the Navigation Center, because for the first time ever in Lakewood, we have that opportunity to say there is somewhere that you can be. And it's a place you can call your own, and you can call it your own 24/7. It's not time-based, it's not season-based. It's really your place to develop, get the help you need, and grow. And so we really value that as a PD too. And that's one thing I always want to talk about as we talk about this dual-sided nature of it, is we all recognize enforcement will not solve homelessness. It's just a reality. What we're trying to do is find that balance so the community can exist and coincide along our efforts to support that.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And that's also what we heard both from people in the community and the residents of the Navigation Center, of being really appreciative of the resource. And then I will pause and put myself at the back of the queue because I'm at my 5 minutes.
Thanks for that, Councilor Cruz. I just wanted to double down on that point. I think that we have some interesting properties that we could consider for safe camping spots right now that we purchased or recently purchased that don't have a clear path and how they're going to be funded and sort of used, that are in more industrial districts that are sort of removed from residents. I'm thinking about like the maintenance facility purchased recently, because I do think the point that's being reinforced is one that we need community members at home to hear. Like, we can continue to move folks around, but they do not evaporate. And so if we can't find safe places for them, and I think the Nav Center clearly has made a tremendous impact on that. But I also think, as we've spoken to a number of times this evening, some people just won't find themselves in that facility. And so if we can find places where, if you're seeing the data showing that this is the biggest increases, we're seeing so many calls for response for the Navigation Center. I hope that part of the conversations we can have soon are around places that we can all agree would be fine to have folks be at. And so we can point them to. All right, so going back around, I would just remind folks, we do have another big topic. So with that, Councilor Cruz.
Thank you. And as Budget and Audit Board Chair, I am very aware of the next topic. But I just had a couple of data point questions that I wanted to ask. I was just sort of curious, like with the PIT challenges, and then also kind of us digging into the HIMIS data, like, are we starting to maybe get a clearer picture of what our numbers are? Or are there any discrepancies there?
We need to do more follow-up on HMIS, particularly around Navigation Center being a factor in there that tracks to HMIS, since it's 4 months in. But yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. And then I know you all were talking about kind of the amazing outreach staff that they're doing, and all the work that they're doing. I mean, even for the like potentially low estimate of the folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, the like 3 awesome people who are working with them, like those are insane ratios for anybody who's done case management, right? And so shout out to the folks who are doing that rapport work in really tough circumstances. So just speaking to that, like we heard also in the feedback from last Thursday that, more outreach services are things that our community wants. And so just naming that. I think the last question I had, since it's been a particularly hot season, have you all been getting more feedback about heat resources, or are kind of like the library folks can kind of be in rec centers in some of those hot conditions? Like, do we feel like those are meeting some needs, or is that feedback you and your staff are getting on the heat?
I think we're getting strong feedback around the Navigation Center.
Okay.
We haven't heard much from Jefferson County libraries this season yet, but I anticipate that we will as we enter. It's July now, but it's August and September that things tend to get even worse. So, and meanwhile, our CAT team navigators are distributing cooling kits and such. We don't have a cooling center in the same way, other than folks who are enrolled at the NAP Center, and potentially if Main Street Ministries comes online in that capacity. But
great. Okay, great. And then to save time, I will send you all the kind of summary of some of the feedback that hasn't been included from our community. But just thank you again to Chris and your team, and Chief Alish and your team for the folks who were there for that meeting. I think it was a great opportunity for different people in our community to come together on an issue of great importance to everybody. So thanks again.
Councillor Lowe.
I heard your hint loud and clear, Mayor Pro Tem. I agree. We need to move on. The only other just chaser thought I would offer is Chris mentioned the sort of action center properties on 14th Avenue and it being in the pre-planning stage. And I think the discussion we just had about the scarcity of housing resources really dramatizes the urgent need for us to get our act together as a city, as a council, and figure out like how we're going to pull together the consortium to fund moving forward on those sites, because there's clearly a desperate need for additional housing options as part of the solution for this. I don't want to further belabor the point, but I'm given we heard a lot of great things about the NAV Center, which is great, and I think this discussion underscores why that was so necessary. We of course hope that we see a Northern NAV Center at some point, so that we're not the only game in Jefferson County. I think one of the things that's also going to be worth keeping our eye on is just the throughput, like how many folks that are in the NAV Center are moving into stable housing, because our ability to do the very hard work of like moving people into longer term housing will be another key variable in determining how many beds are available in the NAV Center for people on the streets to access going forward. So I think just keeping our eye on that is important too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, seeing no other hands. Thank you, Mr. Connor and Chief Alish. We really appreciate the information tonight. You give us a lot to think about. It sounds like we may be coming back with some next steps from here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and transition now to our second topic of the evening, community service survey results. So this evening, City Council and the Budget and Audit Board will receive the results of the Community Services Survey conducted this spring. This agenda item supports one of the City Council's 2026 goals, increased revenue, which includes evaluating the city's long-term financial sustainability and considering future funding options to maintain the services our community values. So to provide some background on the Budget and Audit Board's work and introduce this evening's presentation, I'm going to turn it over to the Chair of the Budget and Audit Board, Councillor Cruz, to say a few words.
Thanks all, and special shout out to our upcoming presenter, Ryan Winger, and our fellow community members on the Budget and Audit Board for sticking with us through a long study session. Really excited for this work, just to ground us in where we're coming from, based on kind of the council priorities, right, and thinking about how do we meet these really critical community needs like infrastructure and sidewalks and public safety investments, et cetera. We all kind of put this idea of potentially increased revenue on the table. And so the Budget and Audit Board has been working to move that forward and see what our residents have interest in and what this could potentially look like. So the Budget and Audit Board moved to work with our partners at Magellan to put together a survey to really understand what priorities our community has, building off of that community survey, and see what if anything, right, people are interested in putting forward to invest in increased amenities in our community. And so excited for the conversation tonight. Just to frame how you listen to this information, where we're hoping to land is sort of a recommendation on whether we want to move forward potentially with a ballot measure and some of the things we're interested in seeing from that. So the Budget and Audit Board and staff can kind of work on anything that comes forward, or put the conversation to rest. So just to understand where we need to land the plane, I'm going to now turn it over to our partners at Magellan, Ryan Winger, to talk through the great survey instrument they put together and what they learned from our residents.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the helpful intro. I do think, and thanks for kind of setting the table in terms of what we should be thinking about as I go through this. I do think it'll make more sense. It'll just be, logistically easier for me if we do the same thing and just wait and do questions at the end, and then I can jump back to any slides that we need to. That way I can see you all raising your hands. So yeah, let's get right into it. On the left side of the slide there, you just see an example of a text message that was sent to a random sample of voters in Lakewood, just explaining that the Budget and Audit Board is fielding an important community survey regarding a potential ballot measure this November. We really want to hear from you. Based off of that random sample that we sent, we completed just over 1,000 interviews, 1,091. Which is a really strong response rate. This was, just so you all are aware, over the period from May 7th through the 21st. So those over 1,000 interviews give us a lot of good data to hang our hat on. Important to also note that these results are weighted to represent what we anticipate turnout to look like this November. So this is always a kind of slide that we like to include just to kind of help set the table for what to look forward to, like I mentioned, in November. So obviously 120,000 roughly registered voters in the city, but they don't all vote. And so you look at really what we're kind of anticipating this year is somewhere in between 2022 and 2024 turnout. So probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 80,000 people that are going to vote in the city next year, or this year, sorry. And you see here just kind of the demographics that we are using to weight the survey results, again, so that we can make sure that it's an accurate representation of who's going to come out in November. We also just wanted to include, for the benefit of anyone who comes across the presentation or is watching tonight, some folks are obviously very familiar with the wards. Some may not be quite so familiar. And on a lot of the slides, we do have a ward breakout. So we wanted to include this just for informational purposes as well. But let's get right into it. Let's talk about the key findings of the survey. We found that initially the proposed sales tax increase of 0.5% was viable, but certainly not secure. What we found is that 48% would vote yes, 45% would vote no on the initial ask. After voters received a little bit more additional information about the purposes and why this was being considered, support does increase to 52% yes, 40% no. To me, what that suggests is that certainly there is potential to pass, but what that would entail is a pretty significant effort to educate folks about what this is and why the city is considering this sales tax increase. The next kind of big finding that we had is that public safety remains a dominant voter priority. And it was really the strongest message that we, as we're testing pieces of information and saying, does this make you more likely to support a ballot measure? The one message that was kind of all-encompassing public safety message, mentioning crime prevention, safety improvements, mental health crisis support, and youth programs. 63% of folks, after they heard that message, were more likely to support the measure. And also 64% rated public safety as an 8 out of 10, or 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 importance. So those things are very clearly still top of mind for voters. The other thing that's really kind of important, especially in light of the long discussion from our first presenters tonight, is that the issue of affordable housing and homelessness in this survey comes across very polarizing. So while there are many supporters who cite homelessness and housing affordability as the core reason to vote yes on this sales tax increase, there are also many opponents of the measure that say that is not something that we're interested in funding with this specific tax increase. And hearing more about the affordable housing funding of it, 40% were more likely to reject rather than support the ballot measure. So that's partially why we don't see a ton of growth from that 48 to 52, is because you do have just kind of conflicting messages where, yes, there are a lot of already core supporters that really want to fund these things, but a lot of the folks in the middle or who are more on the no side really don't want them included in the ballot measure. And we'll see that as we get into specific slides. So we wanted to start off really not with just hitting them with the ballot language right off the top. We wanted to start off with just a measurement of, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important are these 2, 4, 7 categories to you, right? So we have homelessness, public safety, crime prevention, improving streets and sidewalks, affordable housing, parks and rec, sustainability initiatives. Obviously, that covers a lot of ground, a lot of different things, but we wanted to see how these different things we're not ranking them against each other because theoretically someone could rate all of them at 10, but it does kind of help us to get a sense of priorities. And as I mentioned, public safety and crime prevention, those are both at the very top. And these numbers in parentheses here, that's simply the percentage that rated it a 10. So public safety, 64% rated an 8, 9, or 10. Crime prevention is also over 60. And then it's a little bit of a drop to 50% addressing homelessness, improving streets and sidewalks, parks and rec, sustainability. And then there at the bottom, you see affordable housing. You know, what I will point out is that obviously these bottom two have, you know, a much higher group of folks that are rating them as either a 2 through 4 or a 1. So you do see affordable housing, that 14% that rated as a 1. Clearly, there's some group of folks that thinks, even if I acknowledge that affordable housing may be an issue, I don't necessarily think it's something that the city itself should be directly involved in. And we see that quite often in a lot of housing we've done, including not specifically in Lakewood, but in Jeffco as a whole. It's something that very typically we see is that, you know, whenever you ask broadly, is affordable housing an issue? Tons of people say, yes, of course it's an issue. But when you start talking about specific solutions, that's where folks start to obviously have disagreements. This is another interesting just kind of follow-up. We said, other than the items listed on the last slide, please describe anything else you'd like the city to allocate revenue toward. And even though we mentioned public safety and crime prevention, they were in the list. A lot of folks still took the opportunity here to reinforce their opinion that those things are important. Same thing with homelessness. Again, that was in the list, but a lot of folks are mentioning what they perceive to be, you know, the issue of homelessness and visible disorder in the city. Also, folks, some took this opportunity to just say, don't raise taxes. Like, I don't want any more revenue allocated towards anything. And then a fourth group, a kind of secondary theme said, I want the city to focus more on kind of core services, potholes, roads, traffic flow, things like that, before undertaking any major new initiatives. So that's kind of just and again, this was obviously not required, but the folks that did choose to answer this question, that's how they answered it. So then we do shift gears and ask them to read potential ballot language. And, you know, here you see the shall taxes be increased, approximately 17.6 million. You know, we found that it's really important to have this exact ballot language in the survey rather than some kind of paraphrase, because oftentimes a paraphrase will lead to just a picture that's too rosy, and you just have to understand, look, when folks are voting, this is what they're going to see. So you see the language there, shall taxes be increased by basically increasing the city sales and use tax from 3 to 3.5%, provided that food is exempt, including groceries, and provided that the revenues will be used for the following. And the bullet points were public safety, traffic safety improvements, pedestrian bicycle safety enhancements, and affordable housing programs and initiatives. So those were the 4 in this kind of draft ballot language that we tested. And as I mentioned before, here's where we start. 48% would vote yes, 45 no, 7% no opinion or undecided. The one thing I will point out here, I'm not going to spend too much time on the demographic subgroups, although those are there for your benefit. But there certainly is, you know, what we would call an intensity or enthusiasm gap here, where definitely reject is at 31, definitely approve is only at 16. So definitely reject is twice as high, essentially, as those folks that say definitely approve. This is very much in line with what we have seen in other municipal polling this year. There's just a lot of just general economic pessimism out there, and it really kind of comes through in a poll like this. Honestly, just like demographically and having done past work in Lakewood in the past, I would have just guessed before the survey was fielded that this number would be a little bit higher. But here we are at 48%. Again, it's not upside down. There's still a plurality that would vote yes and approve, but it's very split. It's kind of a very muddy picture initially. And then, as I mentioned, we wanted to provide more information about why the city is considering this and how the additional revenue would be used. So after reading these, we asked them, would it make you more likely to approve? And really what we consider to be, you know, a piece of information or message that tests well is anything over 60% here. So these are the 2 that really, you know, move the needle the most. And that's, again, that message I mentioned about crime prevention, better lighting, mental health crisis support, programs helping youth stay on track. That kind of catch-all public safety message does test very well, as does a reminder, as described in the ballot language, that it would continue to exempt groceries. So that's something that is really important to have out there as well. Anytime you have a sales tax that's being considered, there is going to be some number of folks that say, especially in hard times with inflation and cost of living increasing, I really, am nervous about a sales tax that can be regressive and can affect lower income people more. So when you assure them that groceries are exempt, that's something that is important to do as well. We also wanted to include a chart in the survey that shows essentially that the new 3.5% sales tax rate would still be below average compared to other municipalities. And again, just reminding them it's a 1/2 cent increase, because sometimes folks will put the decimal in the wrong place and they'll be thinking about, oh, this is going to cost me a lot of money. And it's just trying to level set and help them to understand what we're talking about. 56% more likely to approve, so that's not bad, but it doesn't test quite as well as those first two messages. Going on down the list, talking about missing sidewalk, unable to budget for, a significant portion of sidewalk, about 1 mile per year, and costs are continuing to rise. So that's part of what the revenue from the sales tax would go towards. Again, 54% more likely to approve. Addressing homelessness was identified as a top priority in last year's community survey that you all fielded. And again, additional revenue would be used to address homelessness by doing these kinds of things: expanding needed services and outreach, funding eviction prevention and rental assistance, maybe providing more additional transitional housing options for individuals experiencing homelessness through things like buying property, supporting community-based developments, and things like that. That doesn't test quite as well either, although we're still over 50%. When they hear that, they think, yeah, that does, make me more likely to vote yes and approve. Also could be used to turn underused and blighted properties into sites ready for future development, which obviously could include affordable housing. That's there, 53%. 0.5% sales tax increase would cost approximately $20 per month for the average household in Lakewood. That's something that we do sometimes in our surveys, where you're just basically trying to come up with a general estimate of how much additional, this would cost them on a monthly basis, because still some folks think, well, 0.5%, what does that actually mean? It just helps to give them some kind of ballpark figure, although obviously some folks will spend much more than that. Some folks will spend less than that. And that's probably why it doesn't test quite as well, because they think, well, how are you even coming up with this number? We just want to kind of give them a ballpark. We also included a graph here, a chart, a graphic, I should say, that explains that the revenue could be used to create an affordable housing fund, basically closing the gap for affordable housing projects. So, the top here that says, look, for any of these, or a lot of these projects, there is just that missing gap, that last piece of funding that is often needed. 56% are more likely to support knowing that. Okay, that makes sense. And also, generally, a lot of folks will appreciate when you have grants, investors, like other ways that you're trying to get these things done other than a direct tax on residents. So part of what this is doing is it's showing them, like, look, we're doing our homework. We're really trying to get as much of this funding secured as possible before coming to taxpayers. And so that's part of the work that this graphic shows. City's also considering this due to long-term financial trends affecting many communities. This is more just like an educational piece. It wasn't necessarily meant to dramatically move the needle, but it is kind of important context that sales tax revenue is experiencing a slowdown, and by the way, the cost of services continues to rise. And so this is something that's obviously not unique to Lakewood, but it is a reason why the city is considering the sales tax increase, but it doesn't move the needle as much. It's, you get too many times folks will read this and think, well, it sounds like you just need to, buckle up and deal with it. And it's not, like the sob story here, however, like, oh, the city is in such a bad way. Like, that's not necessarily what folks want to hear, not necessarily what moves the needle, more than talking about all the positive things that you could do with the revenue. So then we asked them again to read the exact same ballot language, basically explaining, thank you for learning all of that. We're now going to have you read it again. and ask them again how they would vote. And, as I mentioned off the top, it does move by 4 points. It moves to 52% yes, 40% no, 8% undecided. And you really see like the intensity gap definitely shrinks. 27 definitely reject, now 22 definitely approve. So like we're moving in the right direction, certainly, by giving folks more information. But 52% is honestly still a fairly precarious level of support, especially in economic times where just a lot of folks aren't generally feeling great. And looking ahead to a potential election in November, there's going to be a lot of things that are entirely beyond the city's control, just generally how folks are feeling about the economy, that can pretty easily kind of chip away at support like this, unless there is a very, very, serious, well-resourced effort to educate folks about the importance of this sales tax increase. So, as I said, we move the needle, and it's pretty encouraging. What we've seen, honestly, in a lot of municipal work this year, we've seen like really frustrating, like folks really digging in their heels where we're only able to move it by like 1 and maybe 2 percentage points. Here we move from 48 to 52, so that's 4 points. It's pretty good, but it doesn't really get us into like comfortable territory. For the folks that said they would vote yes and approve, we wanted to find out why. What is it that's causing you to vote that way? And this first group is just generally folks that think, look, we need to continue to invest in services and quality of life in Lakewood. So they love Lakewood, they love it as a place to live, and they want to keep it that way. Which honestly, like those kind of responses are probably going to be there, like regardless of the ask and regardless of the purposes of the ballot measure. There is a certain group of folks, in any community that says, I love this place that I live. I'm going to vote yes, unless you tell me something really crazy, which we're not doing in this survey. But then, as I mentioned, you do have a very strong group of supporters that are already on board, and certainly they probably came more on board after learning what the ballot language was about support for addressing homelessness and housing affordability. So that is a core desire, a core belief for many of these yes voters. Continuing on, kind of some secondary themes. Yeah, of course, people want to improve safety and infrastructure, and that's a reason for voting yes. And many other folks just said, look, a 0.5% sales tax increase is reasonable. It's not aggressive. It's not too much. It's something that I think I could afford, and I think would really be good for the city. Also, mentioning at the same time that they want clear accountability on how the revenue is spent. But just generally, again, and they're mentioning things like groceries being exempt, that helps. The roughly $20 a month, many people did take that figure and said, oh, well, if that's what it is, that doesn't seem too bad. So they view it as manageable. As far as why folks would vote no, the primary reason is just tax fatigue and affordability concerns, and just now is not the time. And that's the message that you hear, in any year where you're trying to pass something, but it is particularly acute this year. We've noticed in other municipalities and here as well. Also, just a general theme of there are some folks that are skeptical of how the city's managing funds and perception that money is diverted to projects that they don't necessarily support. Obviously, that's a group that's going to be harder to convince to vote yes if they have that perception, but it's not anywhere near as prevalent as just the general tax fatigue. And then here's that third group that really just kind of complicates this conversation, because a substantial share of folks say, I don't want additional tax dollars going towards affordable housing or homelessness solution. So they mentioned that a lot of these initiatives don't benefit residents. They don't want higher density housing changes. They don't want homelessness programs that they view as ineffective and they perceive to attract more homelessness. Again, this is a group of folks that may or may not be persuadable, but just the presence of that in the ballot language is something that they wanted to mention and touch on as a reason for why they'd vote no. And then again, there are folks that whenever they see a ballot language like this, they'll say, this is too much. Like these 4 bullet points, I wish we could break them up into different, so I could only vote on the things that I want and not the things that I don't want. Again, you hear that a lot more from no voters, obviously, than you do from yes voters. But it's very common whenever we have just the bullet points for them to say, oh, that's, is there any possible way that we could not do all this all at once? Because it seems like a lot. We also wanted to follow up to the yes voters. And sometimes a survey like this will ask a follow up to the no voters and say, hey, what if it was a lower amount? Here we wanted to ask follow up to the yes voters, only to that 52% that said they'd vote yes. What if it was a larger increase of 0.75%? And it would cost approximately $31 per month, but it would generate 26.4 million annually. And basically what we see here is we lose about a third of them. 30% of the yes voters would vote no if it was a larger increase. And that's not too surprising to me. Actually, I think the 61% is pretty solid. I mean, like those are like core supporters. So that 60% of the 52%, like that's folks that are just generally going to vote yes because they appreciate what you're doing. But certainly like wouldn't give much thought to a 0.75 compared to a 0.5 because losing a third of the support would be, obviously very detrimental to the chances of success in November. And then we just have the demographics here. Again, where possible, these are weighted to reflect what we anticipate turnout to look like in November. So on things like gender, age, and party, you see even in a midterm year like this year, the largest group of voters is still going to be that 65 or older. Whether folks own or rent, race, ethnicity, demographics you see there, how long they've lived in Lakewood. Obviously, we're talking to a pretty significant chunk that are longtime residents, and that makes sense when you consider the age demographics as well of who's going to vote. And then here you see the responses by ward as well. But lastly, we have an income demographic that just shows, we have a pretty good split of different income ranges across voters within the city. So with that, I know I rushed through that kind of quickly, but I really just want to make sure that we did have time to have quite a bit of discussion here. So I can jump back to any slide you need me to, and I'll just be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Mr. Winger. Really appreciate all the work. And also shout out to our fabulous finance department staff with Director Bjorklund and Mr. Wasserberger. We really appreciate all of your work. So does anybody have questions for Mr. Winger about the presentation? Open to council and our budget not board members. I'll start off with the Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, now that I'm not feeling questions, I can go earlier. I had a question. Wasn't there like Prop GG allowed you to put like how much it costs the individual on the ballot language? And if so, why wouldn't we do that? I thought the law allowed for that. So that $24 a month seemed to be an important data point that like helped folks understand like what does this mean in real dollars for their household? And I'm wondering why we wouldn't include that.
Yeah, so I think in the ballot language, I think what you're referring to is basically it would say costing X dollars on $100 purchase, something like that. I think, and I think legal counsel would probably agree that it's very hard to come up with that 20. Like the $20 figure was just a figure that we used for the purpose of the survey. I wouldn't recommend having it in ballot language because there is, some folks are going to spend more than that. Some folks are going to spend less than that. So I would hate to give the impression that, it's only going to cost you $20 a month, because if you spend, more, it's going to be more than 20. If you spend less, it's going to be less than 20. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Councilor Furman.
Perhaps I missed it, but I wanted to ask, when we talk about this maybe slightly narrow margin that supports it, with your history of this kind of work, what sort of is a very positive percent that you've seen supporting a tax increase? Like at what point is it a comfortable percent without being ridiculous?
Yeah, sure. So generally in pre-election polling, I mean, what we're looking for is mid to high 50s to 60%. I mean, I hesitate to put like a hard number on it because obviously there's been campaigns that came in with very similar numbers to this, and they're like, we got to go. Like, this is something that is urgent for the city to do, and they got it done. They were successful. So it's not as if, oh, you must hit 55% or higher or you shouldn't go. But generally, yes, you are looking for at least 55% in pre-election polls, especially in a time where there's just a lot of economic uncertainty, because that's what can just generally cause folks that are kind of in that probably yes category right now to ultimately end up voting no. And again, that's something that's entirely beyond your control. So yeah, we're not quite hitting that level of that would make me feel super comfortable. But I would also say in kind of in an environment like this, there's not much that is going to be a slam dunk in pre-election polling. So.
Thanks. Can we actually just take the screen share down really quick? Is there anybody who has a specific question about a slide? Or are we just general questions? All right, it was comprehensive, Mr. Winger.
Sure. Yeah, there we go.
Fabulous. I'll go to Councilor LeBure next.
All right, thanks. I didn't have a question, just kind of wanted to make a comment. I was perusing around, just curious about the last time we did some sort of ballot measure kind of like this. And I was looking at our 2024 polling and just wanted to comment that the informed ballot test came out about 56% in 2024. And I just want to mention too that the election result ended up coming in at 61.7% in favor. And so I just wanted to comment on that, not just to kind of illustrate some or add a little context to the conversation. So I thought it's just an interesting point.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a really good point, because we did talk about that initially after we saw these numbers. The core difference between this year and 2 years ago is that 2 years ago was not an increase, it was an extension. And so even just like that difference in itself can explain a lot of, why, if we're voting on this and taxes aren't going to be increased, that just generally folks are more positive towards it than when it says shall taxes be increased. But yeah, no, glad that you flagged the work 2 years ago, because it is kind of instructive to kind of look back and take a look at it.
Yeah, so I think these numbers are, even though this is a different question, I just thought they're pretty similar kind of breakdown, 56 to 53 or 52%. I thought pretty analogous, I think. I guess there weren't any major surprises, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Councilor Kay Cruz. You're on mute.
Thank you. Did the Budget and Audit Board weigh in at all the West Metro's timeline and path forward for sales increase as well? Because that realistically puts us going up, a few points within that. Like, there was a chart that had the Denver Metro sales tax rate comparison, and going up 4 spaces, if we're just judging based off of our tax increase. But if we incorporate West Metro Fire, then we're jumping up 14 spaces, right? That's a dramatic push. Has that been considered?
Sure, yeah, and I'll let someone from the Budget and Audit Board speak to that as well. But I can say, just generally, as we're developing the survey, we kind of went back and forth on whether to mention what other government entities are doing, whether it's a sales tax, like you said, or whether it's Jeffco Public Schools, which also is considering something. And so, like, the decision was made to not make any declarative statements about what other government entities are doing, and just to focus on this one. But you're absolutely right. Like, that's going to be part of the conversation. And as folks are voting, yes, they're going to see the City of Lakewood question first before they get to their special districts. But ultimately, they're going to be choosing whether to vote. If this were to move forward, there would be multiple sales tax increases on the ballot, which typically the dynamic is folks start picking winners and losers, like, I can vote for one of these, but not both, kind of thing. So.
Okay, I appreciate it. I mean, that's my, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, so those are just the city-specific taxes. Those don't, to my understanding, and Ms. Bjork, or Director Bjorklund, or anybody else, correct me, that doesn't include the special district taxes in those other jurisdictions. So I think it's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison, but we also, just to say we have been talking about this, curious of your perspective, but just wanted to make a specification there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, just the concern is that it's going to be a competition at this point, right? So it's just something for us to weigh in, right? We had a presentation from West Metro Fire. We see the needs that are there, right? So just keeping that in mind, just wanted to bring it to the body.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Razik next. And can we also elevate Mr. Smith as well? Thank you. Perfect.
Hi, yes, thank you. Actually, that Councillor K. Cruz just asked my question, which was being relatively new to the Budget and Audit Board. I had heard there were other initiatives that were going to be on the ballot as far as tax increases. And I'm also wondering about from Mr. Winger, from your presentation, and I understand you're kind of just reporting back what the survey results are, but what I do keep hearing you say is that there were a lot of maybe too many initiatives on the question as to where the sales tax would go towards. So are there any recommendations from you at that point, or is it just informative, like this is what we're hearing? Perhaps it would be prudent for us to think about tightening what that sales tax increase could go to, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. No, that's a really good question. And, honestly, it's something where, I don't think we need to do another survey, but there are certain aspects of this that do kind of like lend themselves to digging more into just to take one example, not one I'm recommending, but it is one that is just kind of pops up in the results is, what if we were to remove the affordable housing programs and initiatives bullet point? Because there is a group of folks that said, I don't like that in there. So if we remove that bullet point, yeah, we may bring some people over, but we also might lose some people that for them, that's their core reason for supporting it. And I don't know exactly what that balance is. Like, do we gain 3 points but lose 2 points or whatever? So certainly there is, whenever you have 4 bullet points like this, and yeah, they're kind of tangentially related, but sometimes folks will read them and say, why are these all together? Like, it's a very common question folks will ask and say, well, couldn't we just do a smaller increase? It's only for affordable housing, and then folks could just vote on that. And then couldn't we do another one that's only for public safety? And at some point, it just gets impractical for a municipal government to do that. Like, you're not going to put 5-6 different things on the ballot, like every time you're considering a sales tax increase. And just like the average voter, that's not how they think about it. They want to be able to vote on things like one by one. It doesn't mean that that's what you have to do. It's just that some folks, that's how they think about these things. So yeah, I mean, generally, like a recommendation, again, it's difficult for me to say because I'm not sure the dynamics of removing one of these bullet points and how much we'd gain, how much we would lose. I think it's an interesting question. I don't think that there's anything in this ballot language that says, oh, if only we could do this, we could, guarantee a win. We could get ourselves like 5-6 more points. Like it's pretty, as it is now, it's pretty concise. Like, the wording of it makes a lot of sense. It specifically calls out that food, including groceries, is exempt. Like, if that wasn't in the ballot language, I would say, well, based on what we learned, we definitely have to put that in the ballot language, but it's already there. So I think the board did a pretty good job of optimizing the ballot language to begin with. It's just a matter of those 4 bullet points, which are, a little bit interchangeable. Could we take one out? Could we add something, whatever the case may be. So.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, I think you might have just answered my question, but let me phrase it just a little bit differently. In looking at the negatives or the reason people were saying they wouldn't support it, I mean, there are some categories, as you pointed out, we just can't do anything about, right? I mean, that's just where they're at, and there's probably no moving them. But on one of your slides, in the last one, it said demand for prioritization, accountability, and specificity. In thinking back to what Councilor LeBeer mentioned with the 2024 vote, I mean, that was a and it's hard really to compare them, right? You already explained why you can't. But one of the things they had in there was there's 3 buckets of where that money can be spent. And if I'm reading that, it sounds like there's at least some interest in knowing that the money would be spent in, say, one of those 3 buckets, or say in 3 buckets. I'm not talking about doing a piecemeal. But was there any discussion about whether it made sense to say that that money will be dedicated to specific things, even if they're defined broadly?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Because the language as we tested it does say, begins and it says, and tax revenues from such additional 0.5% sales tax shall be used for city purposes, including but not limited to. And then it has the 4 bullet points. So including but to your point, including but not limited to is not the same as saying specifically dedicated to these things. So that kind of stronger language, that kind of like assurance that like you said, like you picked up on, some folks would like to see. That could make a difference kind of on the margins. I don't think it would dramatically change the results that we're seeing here. But I do think there is some value in considering like specifically dedicated or whatever the words would be, just to kind of assure folks that rather than kind of the including but not limited to language. There's obviously drawbacks and benefits to both ways. But it is something I think that would be worth considering, to your point, because it allows some folks, and I hate to let the viewpoints of folks that may find some other reason to oppose it, right? Like if that's the group of folks that's saying that and they're just going to say, well, I still don't want to vote for it because I don't think we should raise taxes, then it gets to be a tricky question. Like, who are those folks? Are they really movable? I'm not sure exactly, but it would kind of help to kind of build that trust and the accountability directly into the ballot language. So,
thank you.
Councilor Lowe.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. These presentations really are helpful in helping us sort of understand what our thousands and thousands of residents and voters are thinking about these important issues. So thank you for your work and for teeing this up so clearly for us. We're really grateful. It's a little challenging for us to go out and talk to all 155,000 people at once. So we appreciate it. You at the very beginning, you sort of said that in constructing your universe of like 1,000+ respondents, it was kind of a blend of 2024 and 2022 voter turnout. With the theory being that 2026 is likely to be somewhere in the middle of that, right?
Yep.
I mean, without generating too far into sort of political waters, I guess a lot of people that are just doing their best to prognosticate voter turnout, it seems to me they think that the 2026 midterm will be quite different than the 2022 midterm and have maybe a little bit more in common with, say, the 2018 midterm, just in terms of like the turnout we might expect and the level of political engagement we're seeing from people relative to a midterm in 2022, where it's safe to say maybe in a community like Lakewood, turnout might have been just a smidge lower than what I think some people maybe expect in 2026. So is it possible that if this was benchmarked in part on a 2022 turnout universe, that it may be slightly underestimating the level of turnout we could expect, and how would that change the results much?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I mean, the dynamic that you just described really is the reason why we're kind of targeting between a 2022 and 2026, 2022 and 2024. Generally, I hesitate to say, oh yeah, it's going to be just like a presidential. Like nothing's like a presidential, where nearly 90,000 people voted in Lakewood. And obviously, the higher the turnout, and this is true in most places up and down the Front Range in Colorado, the higher the turnout, the younger the turnout, the more folks that are, just generally open to tax increases for whatever reason, just ideologically, are going to vote. So certainly there is, to the closer we get to that 2024 number and the further we get away from 2022, you're absolutely right. Like the picture that materializes could certainly end up being a little bit rosier than what we're seeing here. I guess it's just kind of like a general like pollster's preference of whether we're going to be conservative, whether we're going to, just assume like, oh yeah, everyone's, it's going to be off the charts. But again, like it's, I've also heard folks just like, again, like we don't need to do too much political prognosticating here. But if we don't see massively high turnout, but it's because one group of people is far less engaged than the other, then the turnout changes differently in that sense too, right? Like maybe we see not quite as high turnout, but the reason for the low turnout is because a certain group of folks is really kind of disengaged because they're not happy with the process and how things are going. So that can lead to a different turnout as well. It's really like it's not an exact science. It's a little bit of just looking at the numbers. Like we're not completely flying blind because we know what's happened in the past. To your point, even going back to 2018, but we're just trying to come up with the best guesstimate of what the demographics are going to be of the vote. But yeah, I definitely appreciate your question because it's certainly possible that, the other thing that's kind of tricky to track year to year in Colorado municipalities is unaffiliated voters, because every 2 years they're like growing significantly. It doesn't mean that folks are disaffiliating with the parties. It just means that new registered voters are far more likely to be unaffiliated. And that kind of makes prognosticating a little bit difficult too, because a lot of like unaffiliated voters come at the world differently, and you can't put them all in one box. So there's a lot of variables at play, but I generally think you're right. I think it's at least possible that we have, call it a wave, call it, more similar to the last midterm prior to 2022, like you said, so.
Got it. And Ryan, one other question, just building on Councilor Ryan's point. Is this fair to say, or feel free to kind of tweak or readjust this? If I'm reading you right in terms of this theme of folks, one of the themes that you picked up in this presentation is accountability, transparency. Folks want to know where the dollars are being spent. It would seem that to the extent, whatever the final list of priorities that we're asking folks to fund is, it would seem that to the extent that we're able to set the money into like a dedicated fund rather than sort of putting it in to the extent that voters really genuinely believe that this will go in a restricted fund with restricted uses that are tied to these very specific things, rather than being sort of pulled into more general funds. That it seems like you think that would probably, whether that's part of the ballot language itself or part of the policy behind the ballot language,
sure,
that would be attractive to voters. Am I reading the results of this poll right?
Certainly, yeah. And especially, if we're going to call back to, the extension 2 years ago, that was very much, the scenario of that one, where it's very clear where the money's going and what it's used toward. Like you could be very specific about the categories and where the money's going, or you can just be like super detailed and say, we're doing it on, this, and this. Like that level of specificity is maybe not necessarily, but I think what folks are asking for is just generally an assurance that if this revenue, if the sales tax increase does go into effect on January 1st, 2027, they know generally what the money's going towards, and it's not being used for something that wasn't even included in the ballot language. So,
yep. Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah.
Councilors, thanks.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate all your experience and sharing that with us. I wonder if you've had any experience with this scenario. A scenario somewhat like ours that, it's tenuous. The survey shows that if we put it on the ballot, it could go either way. So let's say, have you seen someone, it was tenuous, they put it on the ballot, it failed. I wonder what happens next. Have you seen someone bring it up again? And what are the possibilities of, so in other words, is there just this small window? Is there just a window? And would you speak to that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because there is sometimes a misperception out there that, you only get one crack at it. And, once it fails, you better not ask them again. Like, I certainly don't subscribe to that viewpoint. We have had plenty of our clients. Honestly, it happens less with municipalities, more with school districts, where a school district will have something on the ballot and it fails, it comes up short, and they go back the next year. Oh, and it's successful. So what happens in that case is generally how I like to view it is it basically turns a 6-month education effort into an 18-month education effort if you want to go back the next year. It's not as if the day after election day you failed and everyone forgets what you told them and they forget that it's a problem and it's just like, okay, we're back to square zero. Like practically that's not how it works. You're not back to square zero. You've spent time educating people about the need. That doesn't go away. And in fact, what happens sometimes is that the need just becomes more acute and it's almost an easier story to tell. Like, we heard you. We obviously respect the vote from last year, but here's what's happened in the interim. Here's what's happened since then. Things are not getting cheaper. Things are getting more expensive. And so certainly it's because sometimes we do, like we'll have clients that are almost like paralyzed about whether to go because they think if we fail, we can never go again. Like, so they're looking for like the perfect environment, the perfect time to go. And, if that's the case, you're going to be waiting, forever, because there's always going to be something that says don't go this year because X, right? And even though X resolves itself next year, there's going to be something else that says we still shouldn't go. So I definitely don't recommend it just to be something where you're sitting around thinking we're so indecisive because we're so afraid of failing in November. Like, don't let fear be the reason why you do or don't put something on the ballot. Like, you've got to push past that and think about something, just think about, again, like the prospects and where you're at and what happens if it does fail, just like gaming out that scenario, just like you just did in the question you asked me. Certainly it's not a case where, I guess where we do see that dynamic more often is when it's like a big capital project, say a new rec center. A lot of times when our clients ask voters to fund a rec center and it fails, I will recommend and say, don't go back and ask them next year. Like, do some more work, maybe give it some time to breathe. But that's not the scenario we're talking about here. We're talking about just funding core city services. And every year that goes by that these services aren't funded at the level we'd like them to in order to maintain the status quo and why folks love living in Lakewood, it's getting worse, not better. So I know that was kind of a rambling response, but I hope I kind of gave you some kind of answer to what you were looking for. So.
Yes, it was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Lots of robust discussion. Last call for questions. All right. Thank you again so much, Mr. Winger, for the comprehensive presentation and for the expertise. Thank you. I'm going to shift us into, as the mayor always loves to say, of the landing of the plane and the clarity that staff need from us tonight in terms of moving forward the process of what this looks like. So I think the questions before us are, one, do we want to continue on this project of moving towards a sales tax initiative on the ballot? And if so, do we want that to reflect what we asked voters about in this survey, or are there other considerations for staff as we work to put these things towards an official vote? So I will open that up and would love maybe a couple of comments, and if there are some themes, then we can maybe move towards a more broad decision-making process. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thanks. I would advocate that we keep moving forward. I think I appreciated Mr. Winger's one of his last points, like, we could wait forever for the perfect moment. I think that we've showcased a need, and now it's going to be a well participated in election. So I wouldn't advocate for us to not participate. I do think that the theme around affordable housing though is something that I would want to revisit as far as like the themes that the funding would support, because it did have we saw going in a direction that's different. And I know that we are eager to find funding for that, but I think that this is probably not the avenue for that.
Thanks, Councilor Libier.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my comments are just more broad in general, but I do think we should continue the conversation for sure. I think the reality is a lot of the things that folks in our community want or say they want, or the community they want to build, it costs money. And so we have to continue to have that conversation. And frankly, Lakewood, I don't know that we've done a good job of continuing to have that conversation sort of more regularly. A lot of communities, what was it, Wheat Ridge, just a couple of years ago, did a specific thing, that targeted their sidewalks, and communities pretty regularly, target their capital improvement funds to sort of help bring in those, public safety measures for road safety, and to help with building out the bike lanes, and to, address all the other capital needs that cities have, like building maintenance and rec centers. And, a lot of communities have those conversations sort of every year, every election. Like, hey, how are we going to fund the new library? Or how are we going to fund the new, fire department? Or I know Lakewood doesn't own a number of those particular capital projects, but anyway, I think the point is that we need to continue to have these conversations, and as uncomfortable as they can be, and often are. And I think, that'll be a good day, actually, when we have a bunch of community members in front of us saying some people like this and some people don't like that. And I think we should be open to, I don't know if we should lock in all of our preferences today. I think really we have some good draft language, from what I can tell. And I think that's a good place to start. And I would say be open to making some adjustments as, we get more public input. So I'll leave it at that.
Councilor Lowe.
Yeah, I agree with what the Mayor Pro Tem said, that we should, can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If we're waiting for the perfect moment, we're going to be waiting forever. And I think Councilor Libier's question earlier actually was a great point. It is worth noting that like the Magellan polling we reviewed in 2024 showed uninformed ballot test, I think, was 52% for Proposition 2A, 56% support informed, and it ended up passing 61%. Of course, we're in a different climate. I think people are even more, I suspect for a range of different reasons, there's maybe a little bit more sensitivity around affordability. So like, I am in no way suggesting or guaranteeing that I think that, we'll overperform this poll. I think it'd be foolhardy to like assume that, but I have some hope that it's possible. Let me put it that way. This is a very hard thing for me to say, and maybe will surprise a couple of my colleagues. Given, I think this is really important for the city. We obviously have real fiscal challenges. We've been talking about that. We are clear-eyed about that. We've seen some of our priorities be underfunded. We know that the city, along with, frankly, we are blessed and grateful to our city manager and CFO and the people working for them and the council too, for the fact that we're actually in a pretty good fiscal situation, all things being equal relative to maybe some of our other cities. That said, there's no question we're getting signals that we're going to be engaging in some belt tightening. And there's no question that some of the priorities that we care most about, we're making really hard choices about. So I think we should move forward. And given that, I do think that we need to be leading with our strongest argument. And this poll, although I frankly think that it's complicated, and polls, understanding public opinion is never like a completely binary thing. And I think this poll is giving us a couple of like conflicting data points. I think on balance, I sadly agree with the Mayor Pro Tem that leading with we should fund the Affordable Housing Fund is not necessarily our strongest argument. I think, we got to listen to our voters and the public is I think saying we should lead with public safety and crime prevention as the most compelling, sort of urgent need here, where I think we can do a lot of good. Frankly, we can talk more about that. I would frankly also advocate, sidewalks and infrastructure, although it pulled a little less well, it still pulled pretty strongly. And I think I, for one, am extremely frustrated with sort of the zero sum sort of resource scarcity that we're facing with respect to funding things like sidewalks, bicycle lanes, infrastructure, speed bumps, traffic calming to get people to slow down. So I think those are two really high priority things that I think there seems to be a lot of public buy-in. I in no way think that we should give up on funding an affordable housing fund. I think there actually are a number of strategies out there available to us, but I do think that we need to completely decouple that conversation from this question of a sales tax increase. Or let me put it this way, although I think there's a reasonable, rich debate to be had about that, and I could frankly argue it the other way too. I think on balance, we ought to lead with the strongest argument, which is some of the things I just listed, and have a completely separate track discussion, which I'm happy to continue to engage in with my colleagues at HPC about how we fund and sustain an affordable housing fund, which I think we can still do, but I don't think that going to voters and asking them to increase sales taxes is the most strategic way to do it. So it kind of hurts my heart to be there and to be making that argument to all of you. It makes me sad. But I don't think we need to give up on the affordable housing fund. I think we can still do it. I just don't think we do it with this specific approach. So that's kind of where I am.
All right, I've got Councillor Sinks and Councillor K. Cruz in the queue. I'll also invite, I know this is a more familiar format for those of us who are on council, but if any of the community members on the Budget and Audit Board would like to share, welcome to raise your hand. So I'll pass it over to Councillor Sinks.
Thank you. Yes, I agree that we ought to move forward with this, however that looks. And in addition to moving forward, as we heard on Monday night, we need to think about how we can pull in the community, whether it be staff speaking, and we publicize meetings, etc. I know we asked the staff to say, to bring recommendations on how other municipalities increase trust. And so right from the start, let's include how we're going to talk to the community and inform them and do that piece as well. That's my only comment. Thanks.
Councillor K. Cruz.
Yes, thank you. So, like I mentioned earlier, right, just keeping in mind what West Metro Fire is doing, the data obviously is very clear that crime prevention, public safety are the strongest testing messages, for a measure like this. Oh, what a time to lose your voice, huh? For me, what that means is we'd both be reaching for the same will of voter goodwill. And there's the same justification. And my concern is one is going to dilute the other's case. And, to my co-councilor Roger Lowe, going from affordable housing to the messaging towards crime prevention and public safety, I kind of counter that. I think, with the sidewalk backlog, 210 miles, I think a differentiated campaign with West Metro Fire would put us in a way better position. We know West Metro Fire's situation is closer to as essential and time sensitive. And I just believe that if we don't touch the same messaging as West Metro Fire with public safety, it could let both pass without directly cannibalizing each other, which I would want us to avoid.
Mrs. Neros.
Thank you. I agree that we should continue the conversation, and I really appreciate Councillor Cruz's remarks about West Metro Fire, because that's new information to me. Maybe I wasn't involved or didn't have that information available. I also just am interested in the process. I know that, we have to notify Jefferson County Clerk by July 24th, which is just 4 days away. So wondering about how the decision is made. Is it like we vote here, we're voting Wednesday when we meet? And then I also wondered, we haven't really talked, we've talked about the categories and the buckets of funding, but not the amount. So the 0.5 or the 0.75. And it seemed like the poll showed that 0.5% was more favorable, and we lost some traction when we increased that. So just I agree that we should continue the conversation. It seems like there's still more work and more information to be gathered for this to be successful. But I think because I'm relatively new, I'm just not understanding what the process is.
Absolutely. And I think that raises a great point, and I'll just make that process point before going back to the queue. And anybody step in from staff if I'm wrong here. So in our study sessions, we can kind of make a recommendation of how we want to move forward, and that can sort of indicate what the clerk will sort of nod to the county, and then the council as a body will sort of vote more specifically on whether to send it to the ballot in August, is usually the timeline of how we do that. But correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Clerk, or anybody else.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. You caught me with my jacket off because I was getting hot like Will. So I apologize for that. The notice to the county is not a firm commitment. It's just the intent to coordinate. So the city could always withdraw that, I guess, the initial notice to coordinate, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Robb. Ms. Racick.
Yes, thank you. I agree with the others as well. I would like to continue the conversation and move forward with this because from a financial perspective, it is clear that there is a need for additional revenue. And I think what I have heard a lot of since joining this board and becoming more involved is just the urgent need for the citizens to understand and be educated, and as well from Mr. Winger, with a more educated educational response or effort, I think that there is real good chance that this could move forward, because I do think that most of us, that are citizens that I talk to, we want to live in a great city, and we understand the need to invest back in it. And so I think that it's just incumbent on us to figure out the best way to get that message out and to educate the population. And I am also agreeing with Councilor Kay Cruz about, that not competing, hopefully, but there are other initiatives as well, and that tax fatigue can hit hard. So those are my only comments. I think it is an imperative move for us to make to keep moving forward with this, but those are just kind of my thoughts about what came out of that study.
Thanks all. Lots of really helpful insight. Okay, Councilor Nystrom, and then I'm going to potentially move us to land the plane. So if anybody else has any final comments, get in the queue.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just, I kind of think we're not in a good place for this right now. And I do think that the sales tax request from West Metro Fire will garner a lot of attention, and necessarily so. But I also think, this type of initiative or increasing a sales tax per se, if we combined it with other things that are essential, might be a better avenue for that. And I think just right now we're just not in a good place for this this time around. But I think there's a way to get there.
Thank you. All right. I'm double checking. All right. Thanks all. So definitely some varied experiences that I'm hearing, but by and large, I'm hearing that we want to continue this conversation. That doesn't necessarily indicate support forever, but that's what I'm hearing by and large. Can I just get an indication, like thumbs up, thumbs down from folks? All right, that seems like everybody. Great. Okay, so it seems like a yes will continue. Second, I appreciate Mrs. Nares for bringing up the amount. I'm going to make an informed assumption that most of us were talking about 0.5 instead of the 0.75. Can I just get a quick thumbs up or thumbs down? 0.5? Okay, great. Awesome. I'm glad we have that clarity. And then it sounds like we still have some work to do among us about what we want to have included in there. So I'm hearing the potentially most amount of consensus for moving the affordable housing piece out, although just like our residents had, there also is some strong support for keeping that in. So just to start the conversation again, amendments can be made, but I'm going to just strongly request that if there are any amendments people are thinking about, right, we're like sending this to the ballot, so I don't want us to start wordsmithing stuff on the dais when we get there. So just as much notice as possible for us to have options is going to be crucial. But what I'll ask for right now is maybe thumbs up or thumbs down of including what we have now minus the affordable housing bullet point. Is that what we want to sort of move forward as a starting point for the conversation? Again, recognizing that that could change. So what we're voting on is including affordable housing. So yeah, yes is yeah, go ahead.
Could you just remind us what the other three bullets are? Just
yes. So we have public safety, which includes police, homelessness, crime prevention, traffic, and traffic infrastructure, and pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. So confusingly, potentially, but a thumbs up is taking affordable housing out. A thumbs down is keeping affordable housing in. All right, that seems like everybody. Okay. And then one theme that I heard in the questions, but I just wanted to highlight, I think is about the clause of the including but not limited to. Is that something folks are interested in having some options on? I don't want to get into wordsmithing right now, but do we want to potentially try to see what the implications of dedicating this more specifically would be? Yes, no. Recognizing that there may be some operational complications of that we have to explore.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding what you're asking us. I apologize.
Thank you for the clarity, for the point of order. It sounds like there might be a debate to be had about striking the including but not limited to, so that it is only the funding is only directed towards what we're asking people about. So maybe the question, to state it more plainly, would be, do we want to explore a more specifically directed measure?
I count 8 yes.
Okay, great. So we'll have that as an option. Again, with trying to have some as much of that vetted and clear before we start having some on the dais conversations about this. All right, Ms. Hodson, Ms. Bjorklund, anything else we need on this front?
Point of order. It seemed like homelessness was in there somewhere, wasn't it?
Yes, in the public safety portion.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Councilor Lowe?
Sorry, I know you're trying to land the plane.
Okay.
I think my interpretation of the 8-2 vote we just, or more than that, because the 8 votes that just were cast was like some kind of restricted fund, but I may be not interpreting that. Like maybe you meant it more broadly, like the question of sort of whether to put this money in some sort of restricted fund for the sort of the transparency accountability argument versus not. Is it worth taking a vote on that specifically?
I don't want to maybe delve into the exact operational piece of that quite yet.
Fine.
The concept, but point taken.
Fine.
Great. All right. Any other clarity? Mr. Clerk and Ms. Hodson, Ms. Bjorklund, anything you need?
I'm waiting to hear from Holly. Holly, is there something else?
No, I think everything, we just need to know that you wanted to go forward with notifying Jeffco at this point. And then Chair Cruz, we can touch base tomorrow on next steps, if that works.
Great. All right. Thanks all. Really appreciate it. And shout out to our board members, many of whom are new, for sticking it out with us in this late evening. So I'll turn it back to the Mayor Pro Tem to land the plane.
Great, thanks for that. And thanks so much to staff for all these great presentations this evening. Great questions from community members and from counselors. We'll move to the portion of study sessions. Do we have any committee reports from council members? Councilor Nystrom.
Yeah, I just want to mention we do have a meeting coming up this Friday, 12:30 for the Sustainability Advisory Committee, if anyone is interested in attending.
Thank you. Councilor Lowe.
And HPC has a meeting on Thursday, August 13th is our next meeting at 6 p.m. Almost certainly 6 p.m. Possibly could be moved 30 minutes earlier. We'll see, where we will be talking appropriately per our last conversation about an ordinance, a draft ordinance creating an affordable housing fund and strategies to fund it.
All right, thank you. And I have a quick announcement from Dr. Cog. Last Wednesday, the board voted to adopt the Building Policy Collaborative Roadmap that establishes a shared vision for decarbonizing the region's buildings and identifies policy pathways toward achieving that vision. So not a regulatory document. It's meant to be like a guiding document that's a resource for municipalities who are entering into this work around decarbonizations. Really exciting of the work that's coming out of there. And I know that there's a lot of folks here on City Council that have been following along on this topic pretty closely. So happy to discuss more offline. And with that, I see no other hands up. So we will go ahead and adjourn this study session at 10:02.